Imagine if someone revealed to you that Adam's partner existed before Eve, and that the descendants of this first woman are still present in our world right now. You found your way to this video seeking the truth about the children of Lilith, and I can assure you, you've come to the perfect place. According to ancient Hebrew writings that were intentionally excluded from the Bible, Lilith served as Adam's original companion within the Garden of Eden. However, in contrast to the compliant Eve, Lilith rejected the notion of being subservient to Adam and escaped from paradise to give birth to a race of creatures that would permanently alter the supernatural reality of our world. In today's exploration, we're delving deeply into the forbidden historical records to reveal the complete narrative of Lilith's descendants. We'll journey from the Succubi and Incubi that invade our dreams all the way to the demons that govern the underworld. Before we begin our journey, if this is your first time visiting this channel, please think about hitting that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't done so yet. But only do this if you truly appreciate the content I create here. I'm grateful you've chosen to join me today. As I always say, I would really love to hear from you. Take a moment to introduce yourself, share with us your location and what time of day it is where you are. This truly helps us appreciate that we're part of a worldwide community. So, with all that said, let's begin our exploration, shall we? The original Eve. Long before the narratives we're familiar with, another name was spoken in hushed tones throughout the darkness. Lilith. Not a biblical figure in the traditional sense most people envision, she makes an appearance in a single verse, receiving barely any mention. Nevertheless, her legend expanded into something vast and frightening across hundreds of years of storytelling. The narrative reaches us through a medieval Jewish manuscript known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira, composed at some point between the 8th and 10th centuries. Within this record, Lilith served as Adam's initial companion, formed from the identical earth that he was, not taken from his rib, not created as some kind of afterthought. She stood at his side as his equal. The conflict started right there in Eden itself. When Adam had expectations that she would lie beneath him, Lilith refused his demand. What reason did she have to submit when they had been created in the same manner, from the identical dust? The disagreement grew more intense. Adam was incapable of accepting her defiant nature. She would not accept his attempt at dominance. Then, Lilith performed an act that was forbidden. She uttered the explicit name of God, the true name that possessed power over all of creation itself. With that sacred word upon her lips, she lifted into the air and departed from Eden, away from Adam, leaving behind the garden and all of its regulations. God dispatched 3 angels to pursue her. Senoi, Sansenoi, and Semangelof chased after her to the Red Sea, the place where she had established her dwelling among the winds of the desert. They located her in that place and presented their ultimatum to her. Return to Adam or suffer punishment. 100 of her children would die each day if she refused their demand. Lilith gazed at the angels and made her decision. She would not go back. Let her children perish. She would stay free, making her home in the wild places, giving birth to demons, and entering human dwellings during the night to steal away their infants as revenge for the children she had lost. This becomes both her eternal curse and her source of power. Expelled from paradise, transformed from a woman into a demon, she haunts the boundaries of human civilization. Mother of monsters, queen of the night, the very first to say no. But this medieval narrative didn't simply appear out of thin air. The authors of the Alphabet of Ben Sira pulled from older, darker sources. They wove together ancient fears that had existed in human imagination for thousands upon thousands of years before Judaism came into being. Lilith's character carries echoes of demons that brought terror to the earliest city dwellers, the first farmers, the first mothers keeping watch over their sleeping children. She represents something primal and ancient. The medieval Jewish scholars who gave structure to her story were providing form to anxieties that came before their religion. The fear of death during childbirth, the fear of infant mortality, the fear of desire that defied control, the fear of women who refused to submit to the order that men constructed. In making Lilith into Adam's first wife, they created an origin narrative for all of these fears. They provided ancient terrors with a name and a story. They offered explanations for why babies would sometimes cease breathing during the night, why women would sometimes refuse their expected roles, why men would sometimes wake up gasping from dreams they couldn't fully recall. The brilliance of the myth exists in its simplicity. One single moment of refusal, one word containing power, one flight into freedom. These three actions transform a woman into the eternal adversary of domestic order. Lilith becomes the embodiment of everything that threatens the family, the home, the carefully constructed boundaries between civilization and chaos. Her daughters would carry forward this legacy. Each one born from her womb in the desert wastelands would carry her spirit of rebellion. Each would prey upon human vulnerability during the dark hours. Each would serve as a reminder to mortals that the forces they feared most were also somehow recognizably human, or had been human once upon a time. The story of Lilith's daughters starts right here, with their mother's choice. Her refusal to submit becomes the pattern for thousands of demons yet to emerge. Her flight from Eden creates an opening through which all of her children will eventually travel, moving between the human world and the realm of spirits, never fully belonging to either one. Ancient echoes. Lilith's origins before Judaism. The name Lilith extends backward beyond Jewish texts, deep into the ancient past of Mesopotamian civilization. 3,000 years before the alphabet of Ben Sira, the people dwelling between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers already held fear of demons bearing similar names and characteristics. The Lilitu were wind spirits in Sumerian belief systems. They traveled through the night air, invisible and dangerous. Three types existed within their classification of terrors. The Lilitu proper, a female demon. The Ardat Lilitu, a maiden spirit who had perished before marriage and now preyed upon men. And the Irdu Lili, her male counterpart, who brought torment to women. These beings shared certain characteristics that would later come to define Lilith herself. They held associations with wind, storm, and desolate locations. They were hunters of the night. They targeted humans during moments of vulnerability, especially during sleep. They posed particular danger to pregnant women, new mothers, and infants. Sumerian incantation texts from the 3rd millennium before the Common Era made repeated mentions of these demons. Clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform form preserve the words that were spoken to drive them away. Rituals designed to shield homes from their invasion. Evidence that people genuinely held fear of these entities and took material action to protect themselves. But there existed another figure, more terrifying than the Lilitu. Lamashtu, daughter of the sky god Anu, stood as the most feared child-killing demon in Babylonian and Assyrian belief systems. Unlike other demons who were merely malevolent spirits, Lamashtu had been a goddess who was cast downward, or who descended by her own choice to bring torment to humanity. She makes appearances in amulets and texts bearing 7 names, each one representing a different aspect of her nature. She rides upon a donkey through the underworld. She nurses a dog and a pig at her breasts. She grasps snakes in her hands. Her appearance alone speaks of motherhood inverted, nurturing the wrong things, fertility corrupted. Lamashtu's primary targets were pregnant women and newborns. She would slip into homes during the night and steal infants from their cradles. She would cause miscarriages to occur. She would infect mothers with fever. She would cause breast milk to dry up. Every danger that faced mothers and babies in the ancient world found its personification in her form. The people of these ancient lands developed elaborate defenses. Bronze and clay amulets depicting Lamashtu's image meant to frighten her away by displaying her own face back to her. Incantations written upon door lintels. Rituals performed during childbirth. Special knots tied using red thread. All of these practices emerged from genuine terror of infant mortality, which claimed perhaps half of all children who were born. When we examine Lilith's later characteristics, we discover Lamashtu's shadow present everywhere. The stealing of children, the nighttime invasions, the special danger posed to pregnant women, the association with fever and disease, even the detail that protection required specific rituals and amulets. These elements didn't have their origin in Jewish folklore. They were inherited from Babylonian tradition. The Mesopotamians also knew the Adat Lilitu more intimately through their texts. She was a young woman who had died before she could marry and bear children. Her unfulfilled desire transformed her into a demon. She would seduce men during their sleep, stealing away their vitality. She embodied frustrated sexuality turned predatory. This concept of the seductive night spirit appears across ancient Near Eastern cultures. Egypt possessed similar beliefs. The Canaanites knew of such demons. The idea that dead women with desires left unfulfilled became dangerous spirits was widespread throughout the region. Jewish communities lived among these cultures. During the Babylonian exile in the 6th century before the Common Era, Jewish scholars found themselves immersed in Mesopotamian learning. They encountered these demons within the stories told by their neighbors. They observed the amulets hanging in homes. They learned the incantations. When they eventually developed their own system of demonology, they naturally absorbed these ancient figures. The name Lilith likely derives directly from the Lilitu. Her nature as a child stealer comes from Lamashtu. Her seductive aspect echoes the Adat Lilitu. The Jewish demon represents a synthesis of older fears, reshaped to fit within a new religious context. Archaeological evidence supports this transmission of beliefs. Incantation bowls discovered across Mesopotamia and the Levant, dating from roughly the 3rd to 7th centuries of the Common Era, name Lilith, alongside other demons from both Jewish and Babylonian tradition. The magical formulas mix languages and religious symbols freely together. Protection against Lilith often called upon both Jewish angels and Babylonian magical words. This reveals something crucial about how Lilith became who she is. She wasn't invented whole cloth by Jewish mystics. She evolved over time. Her character accumulated layers across thousands of years. Each culture that feared night demons and infant death added their own details to her legend. By the time medieval Jewish texts gave structure to her story, she carried the weight of 3,000 years of accumulated terror. The Isaiah reference, a single biblical verse. In the entire Hebrew Bible, Lilith appears by name exactly one time. The reference comes within Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14, nestled within a prophecy of destruction and desolation. The passage provides a description of what will inhabit the land after God's judgment descends. The verse in Hebrew mentions several creatures that will make their dwelling in the wasteland. Wild beasts, howling creatures, the satyr, and one being called Lilith. In most English translations, the word becomes night creature or screech owl, or sometimes night demon. Translators have struggled for centuries attempting to decide what the prophet actually meant by this word. The Hebrew word is late Lilith. It appears nowhere else in the biblical text. This singularity makes interpretation difficult. Without other occurrences to provide context, scholars must guess at the meaning from the root word and from what surrounds it in the text. The root leil means night, something of the night, a night thing. In a passage describing desolate ruins where only wild animals make their dwelling, this could simply mean a nocturnal bird. The screech owl, with its eerie cries heard in darkness, would fit the atmosphere of abandonment. Yet the word's uniqueness suggests something more specific than simply owl. Why use an unusual term for a common bird? Why not use the standard Hebrew words for owl that appear elsewhere in Scripture? The choice of this particular word hints that the author intended something distinctive. Context matters here significantly. Isaiah chapter 34 describes Edom after God's vengeance falls. The land becomes uninhabitable, thorns overgrow the palaces, wild animals make dens within the ruins. The passage lists various creatures: the desert owl, the raven, the jackal. Among these animals, Lilith receives her name. Whether beast or demon, she belongs to wild places. She inhabits ruins. She dwells where humans once lived but can live no longer. This association with abandoned spaces, with the desert, with desolation, would become central to her later mythology. Early Jewish interpreters didn't view her as just an owl. The Targum, an Aramaic translation and interpretation of the Hebrew Bible created in the early centuries of the Common Era, renders the word as a demon. The ancient translators understood Lilith as a supernatural being, not merely a bird. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, made in the 3rd century before the Common Era, translates the word as Lamia, a Greek demon that consumed children. The translators chose to match the Hebrew demon word with a Greek demon word, suggesting they knew what they were dealing with. Saint Jerome, translating the Bible into Latin in the 4th century, chose Lamia as well. He recognized the reference as demonic in nature. His Vulgate translation cemented this interpretation for medieval Christianity. Lilith wasn't an owl. She was a monster from Jewish folklore that Latin readers would understand through comparison to their own myth of the child-eating Lamia. This single verse became the scriptural foundation for everything that followed afterward. Jewish mystics and folklorists could point to Isaiah and say, "See, Scripture itself makes mention of her. The Bible acknowledges her existence. She's not merely a folk belief or a borrowed pagan demon. She has textual legitimacy, scriptural backing." The verse gave Lilith a foothold in sacred literature. Without it, she might have remained a figure of folk tradition alone, told in stories, but lacking religious authority. With it, scholars could construct elaborate theories about her nature, confident they were exploring something the prophets themselves had recognized and acknowledged. Later interpreters read enormous meaning into this tiny textual seed. They asked questions. Why does Isaiah mention her specifically? What does it mean that she dwells in ruins? Why is she associated with wild beasts? Each question generated new layers of mythology, new interpretations. Some suggested she was present there because she had always lived in deserts, ever since her flight from Eden. The ruins Isaiah describes became her natural habitat, places that had fallen away from God's order. She represented the chaos that fills the void when civilization collapses and crumbles. Others focused on her presence among animals. If she dwells with beasts, perhaps she has animal qualities herself, or perhaps she rules over them, commands them. Medieval texts sometimes depicted her with animal features: wings, talons, lion's paws. The verse seemed to authorize these hybrid forms. The passage's apocalyptic tone also mattered greatly. Lilith appears in a vision of judgment. She belongs to the end of things, to the death of nations, to God's wrath made manifest in empty cities. This eschatological association gave her a cosmic significance. She wasn't just a demon who bothered individuals. She was part of the machinery of divine punishment itself. Still, the verse remains brief and ambiguous. Everything built upon it comes from interpretation, not from the text itself. Isaiah gives us only a name and a setting, nothing more. The elaborate mythology of Lilith and her demonic children emerges from centuries of reading meaning into this sparse mention. The consort of Samael, Lilith, in Jewish mysticism. In the Zohar, the foundational text of Jewish mysticism written in 13th century Spain but attributed to much earlier sources, Lilith undergoes a transformation. She's no longer just a demon who preys on children. She becomes a cosmic force, a dark queen with a realm of her own. The Kabbalists who wrote and studied the Zohar saw the universe in terms of paired opposites, light and dark, male and female, sacred and profane. For every holy thing, there existed an unholy mirror. For every force of creation, a force of destruction. God's union with the Shekinah, the divine feminine presence, represented the holy marriage that sustained all of creation. The Shekinah was God's bride, the sacred feminine aspect of divinity itself. Their cosmic union generated blessing and life throughout the universe. But if holiness had its sacred marriage, so must the realm of evil. The forces of darkness needed their own queen and king, their own twisted version of divine union. This is where Lilith discovered her new role. Samael was the great demon prince, often identified with Satan himself. He ruled the left side of the cosmic tree, the side of severity and judgment taken to evil extremes. He was the accuser, the adversary, the angel of death. His name meant poison of God. The Zohar presents Lilith as Samael's eternal consort. Together they form the demonic counterpart to God and the Shekinah. While the holy union creates and sustains life, the unholy union corrupts and destroys. Where divine marriage brings forth life, the demonic marriage spawns demons into existence. This elevation changes everything about Lilith's nature. She's no longer a lone monster lurking in deserts and wastelands. She becomes a queen with a realm under her command, a consort with cosmic significance, a power that balances against holiness itself. Her children are no longer just troublesome spirits. They are the offspring of dark royalty. The Zohar describes how Lilith and Samael seek to corrupt the world. They work to separate the holy from each other, to break apart marriages, to introduce discord and death into human affairs. When a man sleeps alone, Lilith comes to him in the night. When a woman is unguarded, Samael approaches her. They seek to steal human vitality and create more demons through these encounters. According to Kabbalistic teaching, every time a man spills seed wastefully, through nocturnal emission, through solitary pleasure, through any release not aimed at procreation within marriage, Lilith appears in that moment. She collects that seed and uses it to birth more demons into the world. This belief had enormous practical implications for how people lived. Men were taught to guard themselves carefully at all times. Wet dreams became demonic encounters, spiritual attacks. The natural functions of the body became opportunities for evil to multiply. Lilith waited for any moment of vulnerability, any lapse in spiritual defense. The Zohar also provides descriptions of Lilith's appearance. She takes many forms, all beautiful, all deadly. Sometimes she appears as a young bride, radiant and desirable. Sometimes as a crone, bent and horrible. Sometimes she has wings like an owl, connecting back to the Isaiah reference we discussed earlier. Sometimes she appears as flames or as wind, recalling her Mesopotamian origins. Her beauty serves as her weapon. Men who see her true form die instantly from the sight alone. So she hides herself in attractive shapes, beautiful forms. She seduces through illusion. The woman who appears at the window beckoning, the dream lover who seems so real, the flash of desire that comes unbidden in the night. All these might be Lilith stealing what she needs to continue her endless birthing of demons. Samael and Lilith's union produces not just individual demons, but entire hierarchies of evil spirits. Their court mirrors the heavenly court in structure, but inverted, reversed. Where angels serve God, demons serve Samael. Where the Shekinah nurtures creation, Lilith mothers destruction. Some Kabbalistic texts describe their castle, a palace of mirrors and shadows where demons feast and plot their schemes. Others locate their dwelling at the bottom of the cosmic tree in the realm called the Qliphoth, the shells or husks of creation, the waste products of the divine emanation. There they rule over all that went wrong in the formation of the universe. The mystical texts also explore when this union began, its origins. Some say Lilith became Samael's bride immediately after leaving Eden, right after her flight. Others claim she had many consorts first, the demon Asmodeus and others, before finally accepting Samael as her eternal partner. Still others suggest their union existed before creation itself, a possibility so disturbing that most teachers rejected it outright. What matters most is the theological function this pairing serves. By making Lilith a queen rather than a random monster, the Kabbalists explained the organized nature of evil. Demons weren't chaotic beings acting randomly. They had structure, hierarchy, purpose behind their actions. Lilith wasn't just targeting babies randomly without reason. She was waging cosmic war against the forces of holiness, trying to multiply her own kind at the expense of humanity. This framework also provided tools for resistance against these forces. If Lilith and Samael were cosmic powers, then cosmic powers could oppose them, could fight back. Angels could be invoked for protection. Divine names could create barriers against them. The sacred marriage of husband and wife, properly maintained, could ward off the demonic marriage's influence. Mother of demons. The birth of the Lilin. After Lilith fled Eden and rejected the angels' ultimatum, the angels demand that she return. She didn't remain alone in the desert. The texts tell us she began to procreate, birthing vast numbers of demon children into existence. These offspring became known as the Lilin, or sometimes the Lilith, when specifically referring to her daughters. The alphabet of Ben Sira states that Lilith births 100 children each day. This matches the angel's curse perfectly. 100 of her children will perish daily if she refuses to return to Adam. So each day she loses 100, and each day she creates 100 more. An endless cycle of birth and loss, generation and destruction repeating forever. This perpetual birthing serves several narrative functions within the mythology. First, it explains why demons seem infinite in number. No matter how many exorcisms occur, no matter how many protective spells are cast, there are always more demons to take their place. Lilith's womb continuously replenishes their numbers. Second, it links demon activity to Lilith's revenge, her eternal vengeance. She lost her own children because she refused submission to Adam. Now she takes human children in return as payment. Her grief becomes her weapon against humanity. Her loss becomes humanity's loss. The curse transforms her into an engine of retribution, constantly producing new threats. The question arises naturally. Who fathers these countless demons? Different texts provide different answers to this question. Some say she lies with male demons, various consorts who rule different aspects of the demonic realm. Asmodeus appears in several accounts as one of her partners. So does Samael, as we've already discussed. Others name demons, like Agrat Bat-Mahalat's father. Though accounts differ on his identity, his name. Other traditions describe something more disturbing still. Lilith gathers the seed of mortal men while they sleep, harvesting it. Nocturnal emissions, solitary pleasures, even marital relations not properly blessed by prayer. All of these provide material for her to harvest and use. She takes what is spilled wastefully and uses it to create demons from human essence. This belief held real power over medieval Jewish communities, shaped how they lived. Men were taught that every drop of seed carried the potential for a human soul. Wasted seed meant potential children denied life, souls that would never be born. But worse still, Lilith would take that wasted potential and twist it, pervert it, creating demon children instead of human ones. The Lilin inherit traits from their mother, characteristics passed down. They are nocturnal beings, most powerful in darkness and shadow. They can fly or move invisibly through space. They can assume pleasing shapes to deceive humans, to trick them. They hunger for human vitality in various forms: blood, breath, sexual energy, the life force of infants. Male and female Lilin differ in their typical behaviors, though overlap exists between them. Male demons, the Incubi, tend to visit women during the night. Female demons, the Succubi, target men. But both types can shapeshift their forms, and both can appear in dreams or during waking darkness. The Lilin are not mindless monsters acting on instinct alone. Medieval texts describe them as cunning creatures, capable of speech, able to make bargains with humans. They understand human nature well, having been born from the union of demonic and human elements. This makes them more dangerous than simple beasts would be. They can plan ahead, deceive with intelligence, and adapt their methods to each victim they encounter. Jewish folklore developed elaborate classifications for different types of Lilin over time. Some specialized in causing nightmares to sleepers, others brought disease to communities. Some stole newborns from cradles during the night. Others caused discord between married couples, breaking apart families. The demon world had specialization within it. Different children with different roles in the great work of tormenting humanity. Protective measures targeted Lilith's children as much as Lilith herself. Amulets often specified protection against both the mother and her offspring, naming them. Incantations would list multiple demons by name, trying to cover all possibilities, all threats. New mothers were surrounded by guards for the first weeks after birth, because the Lilin particularly targeted the vulnerable window before a child's naming ceremony took place. The concept of the Lilin explains the diversity of demonic encounters that people experienced. If people experience different types of spiritual attacks, that's because different demon children had different natures and methods of operating. The woman who died in childbirth, the man who woke gasping from nightmares, the infant found lifeless in the morning. Each fell victim to a different one of Lilith's offspring, a different demon child. This also provided a mythology for generational trauma, suffering passed down. Lilith's curse perpetuates across time without end. Her children's children continue the war she began against humanity. The conflict between humanity and demons becomes an eternal struggle renewed in each generation that's born. Parents protect their children from the same dangers their parents warned them about before. The Lilin represent more than just evil spirits haunting the darkness. They embody the dark mirror of family and legacy. Where human parents hope their children will surpass them and build better lives, Lilith's children exist only to continue her revenge, her eternal war. Where human families represent hope and continuity into the future, demon families represent endless cycles of harm repeating. Medieval Jews living with high infant mortality rates, with mysterious illnesses that struck without warning, with the intimate terrors of darkness and dreams, found in the Lilin an explanation for their suffering. These weren't random tragedies striking without reason. They were the work of specific entities, driven by specific motivations, and therefore potentially defendable through specific actions, specific rituals. The sons of Lilith, the Incubi, pestilence, demons. Lilith's male offspring occupy a particular niche within demonology. While her daughters gain names and distinct personalities in the texts, her sons appear more often as a collective force, a group. They are the Incubi, the disease bringers, the spirits of nocturnal assault. The incubus, in medieval understanding, was a demon who lay upon sleeping women during the night. The weight on the chest during sleep paralysis, the sensation of being held down, unable to move, the terrifying inability to move or cry out for help. These experiences were attributed to incubi, blamed on them. The name itself comes from Latin, meaning to lie upon someone. Jewish texts describe these male demons as seeking human women, for the same reason Lilith sought human men, to create more demons, to increase their numbers. When an incubus visited a woman, he might appear in dreams as her husband, taking that familiar form, or as a stranger, someone unknown. The encounter would seem real, vivid in detail, sometimes pleasant and sometimes terrifying beyond words. Mourning brought confusion and shame to the victim. Women who experience such dreams often remain silent about them, fearing accusations of infidelity or madness from their communities. But the tradition held that these weren't fantasies of the mind. They were actual demonic intrusions, violations by spirits who could penetrate the boundary between sleep and waking states. Children born from such unions posed theological problems for scholars. Were they fully human, partly demonic in nature? Some texts suggested that children conceived through incubus visits bore subtle marks upon them. They might be unusually intelligent or beautiful compared to others, or they might bring misfortune to their families wherever they went. Medieval communities sometimes blamed unexplained traits or behaviors on possible demonic ancestry in the bloodline. Beyond sexual assault, Lilith's sons specialized in bringing disease to communities. Pestilence demons were understood as actual entities that caused illness by their presence alone. Fever, the symptom, wasn't just a symptom of sickness. It was an invading demon that needed expelling from the body. Different sons carried different sicknesses with them. Some brought plague to entire cities. Others brought wasting diseases that slowly consumed the body. Some specialized in fevers that came at night and lifted by morning light. Others caused the coughing sickness that killed children so frequently. Each disease had its demon assigned to it, and many of these demons were counted among Lilith's male offspring. Mesopotamian roots show clearly in this aspect of the tradition, this belief system. The ancient world understood disease as demonic in origin. Medicine and exorcism were intertwined practices, not separate. Healing required both physical remedies and spiritual defenses working together. Jewish demonology inherited this framework and adapted it to their purposes. The sons of Lilith also appear in texts about possession of human bodies. While Lilith herself might torment from outside homes, entering homes and cradles, her male children could enter human bodies directly. They would speak through the victim's mouth, using the person's voice to communicate. Exorcism rituals developed specifically for driving out these possessing spirits from the afflicted. Compared to the named daughters we've discussed, these sons remain largely anonymous in the texts. We don't have elaborate myths about individual male demons the way we do about Agrat Bat Mahalat or Naama. The sons function as a category, a type, a collective threat, rather than individuals. They are numerous and mostly interchangeable in the stories. This difference might reflect cultural attitudes about gender and danger in those times. Female demons threatened through seduction and child stealing, very specific fears centered on women's roles in society. Male demons threatened through force and disease, more generalized violence and harm. Female demons were individualized because the fears they represented were more complex and layered. Male demons could remain anonymous because brute harm needed less explanation, less nuance. Still, some male demons from the broader tradition were sometimes identified as Lilith's sons in various texts. Asmodeus, the demon of wrath and lust from the Book of Tobit, appears in some texts as either her consort or her son. Sources vary on this relationship. He brings discord to marriages, preventing consummation or causing fights between spouses. Other named male demons include those who cause specific afflictions to humans. The demon of quartan fever, who brought attacks every fourth day like clockwork. The demon of consumption, who slowly wasted the body away. The demon of madness, who stole reason from the mind. Jewish magical texts name and bind these individual spirits, trying to protect against their specific harms through ritual. Incubi had particular association with monasteries and unmarried women in the law. Christian demonology especially emphasized this danger, this threat. Nuns and virgin women were considered prime targets, perhaps because their celibacy was seen as unnatural by demon standards, a violation of nature that demons sought to correct through assault, through force. Jewish tradition worried more about married women being visited when their husbands traveled away. Months of separation left women vulnerable to attack. Men were warned to hurry home lest demons take advantage of their wives' loneliness and need. The intimacy demons offered was a cruel mockery of true marriage, exploiting human need for comfort and touch, for connection. Protection against incubi and disease demons required constant vigilance from families. Prayers before sleep every night. Specific psalms recited at set times. Amulets worn constantly. Not just during pregnancy and infancy, but always. The home itself needed regular spiritual maintenance to stay protected. Mezuzahs on doors and doorframes. Blessings spoken over thresholds. Certain herbs hung in windows to ward them away. Male demons also served as the foot soldiers in the cosmic war between holiness and corruption, where Lilith and her daughters were often depicted as queens and princesses of the demonic realm in texts. Her sons formed the armies that fought. They carried out the bulk of demonic work in the world, the grinding daily labor of tormenting humanity without rest. The first daughters, Agrat Bat Mahalat and Naama. Among Lilith's countless daughters birthed across the ages, two stand out in Jewish mysticism as named, powerful entities with their own domains and characteristics. Agrat Bat Mahalat and Naama appear repeatedly in Kabbalistic texts as queens of demons in their own right, inheriting their mother's power and extending her reach across the world. Agrat Bat Mahalat's name appears in Talmudic sources, dating back to the early centuries of the Common Era, making her one of the oldest specifically named daughters we know of. Her title means Agrat, daughter of Mahalat. Some interpret Mahalat as meaning disease or dissolution, marking her as born from corruption itself, spawned from sickness. The Talmud describes her commanding 18 myriads of destroying angels under her authority. She rides in a great chariot through the night sky, accompanied by her demonic hosts traveling with her. Wednesday nights and Saturday nights are particularly her time, when she travels most actively through the world. People were warned to avoid crossroads during these nights. Stay inside, as encountering Agrat's procession meant certain death for the unlucky. Abaye, a Babylonian rabbi from the 4th century, claimed to have negotiated directly with Agrat Bat Mahalat. According to the Talmudic account, he restricted her travels to certain nights only, preventing her from harming people during the other nights of the week. This negotiation suggests she could be reasoned with. Unlike mindless destructive forces that simply act, she had intelligence, pride, and the ability to keep bargains she made. Later, Kabbalistic texts elaborate on her nature further. She becomes one of the 4 queens of demons, ruling a quarter of the entire demonic realm. The Zohar places her as ruler of the western quarter, though sources vary on exact directions assigned to each queen. She commands specifically over the demons of destruction and violence, those who bring sudden death and disaster to humans. Agrat Bat Mahalat is sometimes called the dancing demon in traditions, associated with wild, ecstatic movement and frenzy. This connects her to older, ancient Near Eastern traditions of ritualized dance that could become possessed or frenzied in nature. She represents the danger in abandoning control completely, in letting the body move without the mind's governance over it. Naama's origins differ from Agrat's significantly. Her name first appears in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, where she's listed as the sister of Tubal-Cain, a descendant of Cain and a metalworker by trade. In the biblical text, she's simply mentioned without any further explanation given. She's the last person listed in Cain's genealogy before the flood narrative begins in the text. Post-biblical tradition transformed this brief mention into something elaborate and dark. Naama became known as a demon of seduction and desire, so beautiful that she captivated angels themselves with her appearance. According to medieval sources, she was among the women whose beauty tempted the angels mentioned in Genesis chapter 6, leading to the birth of the Nephilim, the giants. Some texts identify her as the mother of demons through her unions with these fallen angels. Others make her one of the 4 wives or primary consorts of demons, alongside Lilith, Agrat Bat Mahalat, and the demon Mahalath. In this schema of classification, she represents a different aspect of demonic femininity than Lilith does. Less focused on revenge and rebellion against order, more purely focused on seduction and desire itself. Naama specializes in appearing in men's dreams during sleep. She's the archetypal succubus in many ways, taking forms that perfectly match each man's desire, his specific wants. Her power lies in reading what each person finds most attractive and becoming exactly that in their perception. She doesn't just seduce through generic beauty that appeals to all. She seduces through perfectly tailored temptation, customized to each victim. The Zohar attributes specific roles to her in the demonic hierarchy. She seduces men to spill seed wastefully through her influence. She causes men to betray their wives in thought, if not in deed, in action. She's responsible for nocturnal emissions and forbidden desires that arise unbidden. Every man who wakes from an arousing dream has entertained Naama, whether he knows it or not, whether he's aware. Unlike Agrat Mahalat, who brings violence and death swiftly, Naama's harm is more subtle and slow. She corrupts through pleasure rather than pain. She weakens spiritual discipline through desire over time. She doesn't destroy the body immediately with force, but slowly drains vitality through repeated nocturnal visits night after night. Men visited regularly by Naama grow pale in appearance, weak in body, listless in spirit. Their life force gradually consumed by her feeding. Both daughters inherited their mother's immortality and power over centuries. They don't age with time. They don't tire or weaken. They've continued their work across millennia, from the ancient world into the medieval period and beyond that. Each generation of humans faces the same demons their ancestors faced long ago. The relationship between these daughters and Lilith varies depending on the source you consult. Some texts present them as independent queens who cooperate with their mother but run their own domains separately. Others suggest they serve Lilith directly, carrying out her will in regions she doesn't directly govern herself. Still others imply tension and competition between the mother and her powerful daughters for supremacy. What's clear is that naming these specific daughters allowed Jewish tradition to explain different types of demonic experience people had. Agrat Mahalat explains sudden disasters striking without warning, violence out of nowhere, encounters with death on dark roads at night. Naama explains sexual dreams that feel too real, forbidden desires that won't go away, the slow drain of vitality over months and years. Together with Lilith herself, they cover the range of nocturnal fears that plagued communities. Protection against these daughters required specifically naming them in rituals and prayers. Amulets would list Lilith, Agrat Mahalat, Naama, and sometimes Mahalath or other named demons by their individual names. By invoking their specific names in a protective formula, one aimed to bind their particular powers directly. Generic protection against demons in general wasn't enough when facing queens with their own domains and specific abilities. The Succubi, daughters of seduction and theft. The succubus represents perhaps the most persistent and widespread aspect of Lilith's legacy through history. These female demons who visit men in darkness appear in traditions from medieval Europe to ancient Persia, spanning continents. From Jewish mysticism to Catholic demonology, they share a common purpose across cultures, stealing male sexual essence to create more demons with it. The word succubus comes from Latin, meaning to lie beneath someone. This distinguishes them from incubi, who lie upon their victims from above. But the terminology obscures the actual belief behind it. Succubi were seen as active aggressors in these encounters, not passive partners. They initiated encounters on their terms, shaped dreams to their purposes, and extracted what they needed for their goals. In Jewish tradition specifically, these demons are explicitly daughters of Lilith, inheriting her methods and motivations directly. When Lilith visits men to collect spilled seed, her daughters do the same work. They appear as beautiful women in dreams during sleep, as fleeting figures glimpsed in shadows at the edge of vision, as sudden overwhelming desires that come unbidden in the night without invitation. The mechanism was understood quite literally by believers. When a man experienced arousal during sleep, demons were believed to be actively present in that moment, manipulating his dreams and body for their purposes. The pleasure he felt wasn't natural arising from within. It was induced by demonic influence from without. The emission that resulted became material for creating more demons in the world. This belief transformed normal bodily functions into spiritual warfare, a battle. Nocturnal emissions, which we now understand as natural physiological responses of the human body, were seen as demonic attacks requiring defense and protection. Young men reaching puberty entered a battlefield every night. Every night brought potential assault from these forces. Every morning might mean inadvertently fathering demons without knowing it. The children born from such unions posed theological problems for religious scholars. Were they real beings with substance? Some texts suggested succubi didn't carry pregnancies themselves in their own bodies, but instead took the stolen seed to impregnate mortal women with it, creating the illusion that a woman's husband had fathered the child naturally. Others claimed demon children gestated in the spirit world alone, never taking physical form in our realm. Medieval Christian demonologists elaborated extensively on succubi in their writings. They debated whether demons could actually experience pleasure themselves or merely simulated it for deception. They discussed whether the temperature of demon bodies differed from human bodies during encounters. Most agreed demons were unnaturally cold to the touch. They analyzed whether demon encounters could result in pregnancy that produced actual offspring. Some authorities taught that demons could not create life directly, as creation required a soul, which only God could provide to beings. Therefore, a succubus would visit a man as a succubus first, steal his seed, then visit a woman as an incubus afterward, and implant that human seed into her. The resulting child would be technically human with two human parents, but arranged by demonic intervention and manipulation. This explanation conveniently addressed cases where women became pregnant under suspicious circumstances without clear explanation. It also explained children born with unusual traits or temperaments that seemed wrong somehow. If a child seemed wrong in some way, demon involvement in conception provided an answer that didn't require accusing the mother of infidelity directly. Succubi specialized in mimicry of forms. They could appear as a man's wife in his dreams, preventing him from realizing he wasn't lying with his actual spouse beside him. They could take the form of someone he'd seen and desired from afar. They could even read his mind directly and become his perfect fantasy made flesh. This shape-shifting ability made them nearly impossible to identify during the encounter itself. In the moment, recognition came afterward, upon waking. Men who had been visited would experience certain symptoms that marked them. Extreme fatigue throughout the day, weakness in the limbs, pallor in the skin, listlessness of spirit, wasting of the body, loss of interest in their actual wives and normal relations. Some men became obsessed with the encounters, longing for the demon to return to them again. The succubus' power lay partly in the addictive quality of the encounters she provided, the pleasure offered. Protection required both physical and spiritual measures working together. Men were told to sleep with lights burning through the night, to recite protective prayers before bed every evening, to wear specific amulets at all times, to ensure their beds were blessed regularly by religious authorities. Married men were urged to remain close to their wives physically, as a properly sanctified marriage provided strong protection against demonic intrusion. The fear of succubi also reinforced celibacy and sexual control in religious communities. Men were warned that any pleasure outside of procreative marital relations opened doors for demons to enter. Masturbation wasn't just a sin against God. It was actively feeding the enemy, strengthening demon forces. This teaching gave spiritual weight to sexual restrictions imposed by religion. Women could also be succubi in human form, according to some teachings. Beautiful women who aroused desire in men were sometimes suspected of being demons themselves, or demon-influenced in their nature. This suspicion fell particularly heavily on women who existed outside male control in society: widows living alone, prostitutes, independent women. Their sexuality, not controlled by a husband, became demonic by association in people's minds. The succubus myth also provided vocabulary for sleep paralysis and related phenomena that people experienced: the sensation of a presence in the room with you, the inability to move your body, the feeling of pressure on the chest, making breathing difficult, the experience of a figure approaching the bed in darkness. All these could be explained as demonic visitation rather than natural sleep phenomena. Nocturnal panic attacks, sleep disorders of various types, and the vivid hypnagogic hallucinations that occur during the transition between waking and sleeping states found their explanation in succubi. The experiences were real enough to those who had them. The interpretation assigned them to Lilith's daughters rather than to neurology and brain function. Modern psychology recognizes the succubus phenomenon as cultural interpretation of natural experiences the brain produces. But for medieval communities living in that time, these weren't metaphors or explanations created after the fact. They were believed to be actual entities doing actual harm to real people. Rabbis conducted exorcisms for men who had been visited too often by these demons. Priests prescribed penances to cleanse the sin. Healers provided amulets for ongoing protection. The succubus represents the dark side of desire itself, made external. She embodies the fear that sexuality might be uncontrollable in humans, that even in sleep with defenses down, forbidden urges might emerge unbidden. She's the return of the repressed desires, the desires denied during waking hours that manifest in dreams at night. In making these desires external forces, in attributing them to attacking demons from outside, the mythology provided a way to acknowledge powerful urges without taking responsibility for them personally. The child stealers, the demonic counterpart to motherhood. Among all the roles attributed to Lilith and her daughters through the ages, none held more terror for ancient and medieval communities than their reputation as child killers. This aspect of their mythology emerged directly from the agonizing reality of infant mortality in the pre-modern world. In ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps 40 to 50% of children did not survive their first year of life. Death came from infection spreading, malnutrition, stillbirth, sudden mysterious causes we now call SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Parents went to sleep beside living, breathing infants and woke to find them cold and still in the morning. No explanation visible, no warning signs, just the incomprehensible loss of a child. Human minds demand explanations for suffering they experience. When a baby stops breathing in the night for no visible reason anyone can see, when a pregnancy ends without cause that doctors can find, when a healthy child suddenly sickens and fades within days, people need to understand why this happened. Lilith provided that understanding to communities. The mythology held that Lilith and her daughters specifically targeted newborns and pregnant women for harm. The first 8 days of a male child's life, before his circumcision and naming ceremony took place, were considered especially dangerous to the infant. The child had no name yet assigned, no full identity in the world, making him vulnerable to demonic theft and attack. Female infants were at risk for the first 20 days of life instead. Demons would enter homes at night silently and approach cradles where babies slept. They might steal the child's breath away. They might exchange the healthy infant for a sickly changeling replacement. They might take the child's soul while leaving the body to die slowly. The methods varied in the stories, but the result was the same: a dead or dying child by morning light. Pregnant women faced different dangers from these demons. Lilith and her daughters could cause miscarriage by merely being present in the room. They could twist the baby in the womb, causing complications. They could dry up the mother's milk after birth, starving the infant. They could bring fever and infection to the birthing chamber during delivery. Each stage of pregnancy and early motherhood had its specific demonic threat attached to it. The strangling demon was particularly feared among these threats. She would sit on the chest of sleeping infants, pressing down with her weight until they couldn't breathe anymore. Parents who found their babies blue and lifeless believed this demon had visited during the night. We now know these deaths as SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, but the symptoms matched the mythology perfectly in their minds. A previously healthy infant found dead without clear cause or explanation. Some texts describe how the demons would play with stolen children in the spirit realm after taking them. The baby's cries heard at night, when no baby was present in the house, became evidence of this belief. A mother hearing phantom infant sounds after losing a child could believe her baby still existed somewhere beyond reach, trapped in demon hands rather than truly gone. This belief created elaborate protective practices in communities. Pregnant women wore specific amulets from the moment conception was confirmed until well after birth had occurred. The birthing chamber was surrounded with protective inscriptions written on walls and door frames. Herbs were hung from ceilings and windows. Red thread was tied around the baby's wrist as protection. Visitors were limited strictly to prevent any demonic entry. After birth occurred, someone stayed awake, watching the infant constantly for the first weeks of life. Mothers who could afford it hired watchers specifically for this purpose, paying them to maintain vigil, never leaving the child. Family members who were unable to do so took turns in rotating shifts. The infant was never abandoned, never permitted to go unwatched. Unwavering watchfulness came at the cost of keeping a child alive. When circumstances allowed, naming rituals were conducted hastily. After a child received their name and became part of the community through ceremony, the threat lessened, though it never vanished entirely. Now, demons showed preference for babies without names, yet they remained willing to take children who had been named as well, should the chance present itself. The personal nature of Lilith's drive intensified the danger. Her own offspring had been lost due to her unwillingness to yield. Each human infant, she claimed, helped restore balance in her favor, just slightly. This purpose passed down to her daughters. Their actions weren't indiscriminate killing. They were carrying out their mother's unending vendetta against the descendants of Adam and Eve. Certain traditions maintained that Lilith deliberately focused on offspring of women who had shown her disrespect or neglected appropriate protective measures. A woman who forgot to wear her protective charm, who bragged about her uncomplicated pregnancy, who skipped the necessary ceremonies. Now these oversights attracted demonic focus. The mythology further explored the plight of couples unable to conceive. When a woman failed to become pregnant, demons might be obstructing her fertility. When she experienced repeated pregnancy losses, demons were taking the children prior to delivery. The inability to have children wasn't merely unfortunate circumstances or physical incompatibility. It represented spiritual combat that demanded spiritual remedies. Solutions ranged from herbal mixtures and liquid preparations to complex ceremonies and sacred journeys. Protective charms required periodic replacement. Prayers demanded continuous recitation. The struggle to safeguard children and guarantee successful delivery consumed tremendous amounts of effort and materials. This dimension of the legend fulfilled a psychological role, extending past simple explanation. It offered parents actionable steps. Confronted with the devastating powerlessness of witnessing children grow ill and perish regardless of all precautions, the defensive ceremonies provided something tangible to do. Ignite a flame, recite the phrases, display the charm, take some action instead of remaining helpless against destiny. The shared aspect of the danger also strengthened community connections. Women exchanged protective wisdom. They handed down charms and spoken formulas. They kept watch together beside newborns. They consoled one another through heartbreak by confirming that demons, not failures in mothering, bore responsibility. In contemporary society, sudden infant death syndrome continues to occur without advance notice or clear cause. Parents continue to endure the unimaginable tragedy of a seemingly healthy baby dying during sleep. We've substituted demon legends with clinical language, yet the sorrow and bewilderment stay unchanged. The demons who stole children represented the deepest terror known to any parent. That despite all safeguards, their child could be taken. That affection alone cannot ensure safety. That unpredictable catastrophe can destroy a household in one night. By assigning this terror a physical form and identity, by transforming it into something that might potentially be kept at bay, the mythology offered a modest degree of psychological mastery over forces beyond control. Protective charms and spoken formulas, the supernatural battle at the bedside. When demons posed constant threats to households, offspring, and those who slept, then safety demanded continuous watchfulness and formidable supernatural defenses. Jewish communities created an expansive collection of protective tactics against Lilith and her offspring. These weren't simple folk superstitions, but genuine magical instruments, meticulously designed and ceremonially empowered. Protective charms constituted the most conspicuous and widespread defense. These were compact items inscribed with names, emblems, and sacred words, worn upon the person or positioned in particular spots. They varied from basic to intricate, inexpensive to costly, standard to individually crafted. The most prevalent type displayed the names of three celestial messengers, Senoi, Sansenoi, and Semangelof. These were the three divine agents God dispatched to bring Lilith back from the Red Sea. Although they didn't succeed in her return, they secured a vow from her. She promised that wherever she encountered their names, she would possess no ability to cause harm. Consequently, showing their names operated as a contractual obligation, compelling Lilith to honor her pledge. Additional charms employed divine appellations and scriptural passages. Psalm 91, which addresses protection from terrors in darkness, featured prominently. The Shema, the foundational affirmation of Jewish belief, offered powerful defense. Sacred names inscribed in particular configurations established protective boundaries. Scarlet threads functioned as affordable, readily available protection. A crimson thread bound around an infant's wrist or worn by an expectant mother carried defensive power. The red hue itself was regarded as protective, able to repel evil forces. Certain sources link this to blood's color, representing vital energy that demons found difficult to overcome. Vessels inscribed with sacred formulas represented another significant category of defense. These incantation vessels, discovered throughout Mesopotamia and the Levant, originate from the 3rd through 7th centuries of the Common Era. Now, archaeologists have unearthed thousands of them, offering physical proof of how prevalent these convictions were. The vessels were inscribed on their interior surfaces with spiral text, frequently in Aramaic or Hebrew, occasionally combining several languages. Now, the inscription would identify the individual or household receiving protection, enumerate the demons being repelled, call upon angels and sacred names, and order the demons to depart. After inscription, the vessel was positioned inverted beneath doorways, in room corners, or interred at property limits. Certain incantation vessels specifically identify Lilith, ordering her to leave and never come back. Others enumerate her daughters alongside her. The formulas frequently contained warnings. Should the demon refuse to leave, stronger powers would be called forth to restrain or eliminate her. The inscriptions establish a ranking of spiritual authority with the demon at the bottom. One widespread formula proclaimed, "You are restrained by the Lord's angels, secured by Solomon's seal, denied entrance by the names inscribed here." This called upon several sources of power: angelic authority, King Solomon's fabled magic, and the strength of the written divine appellations themselves. Living quarters demanded regular spiritual upkeep. Upon occupying a dwelling, protective inscriptions were positioned on door surrounds. Mezuzahs, compact containers holding parchment inscribed with biblical passages, were attached to door frames. Windows might have defensive symbols carved into their surrounds. The dwelling transformed into a stronghold. Every entrance point protected. Birth chambers received particular attention. Prior to labor commencing, the space would be readied with charms suspended on each of the four walls. Protective passages written on parchment and positioned beneath the sleeping surface, and particular herbs distributed across the floor. Certain traditions included tracing a circle surrounding the bed using chalk or salt, establishing a defined area demons were unable to penetrate. Following delivery, the mother and infant stayed within this safeguarded space throughout the perilous initial weeks. Visitors faced restrictions and examination. Those entering needed to conduct ritual cleansing and utter protective phrases. The objective was to reduce any chance for demons to breach defenses. Men concerned about nighttime emissions and attacks by female demons employed different safeguards. Charms worn throughout sleep, prayers spoken prior to retiring, avoiding rest in chambers containing mirrors, since demons were believed to traverse through reflective planes. Certain especially worried men would remain wakeful throughout the night, studying sacred writings, using continual involvement with holy words as a defensive act. The protective formulas frequently incorporated conditional clauses. Should you come near this dwelling? Should you penetrate this chamber? Should you make contact with this infant? Accompanied by progressively harsh outcomes. This established a discouraging effect, cautioning demons that penetrating the defenses would result in retribution. Certain charms operated proactively instead of defensively. Rather than merely driving Lilith away, they commanded her to fulfill protective responsibilities. Particular inscriptions compelled her to watch over children instead of harming them, binding her power for beneficial purposes. This reversal of her character was regarded as especially potent magic, since it employed her own force against demonic dangers from alternative sources. The effectiveness of these safeguards received continual reinforcement through selective recollection. When an infant wearing a charm survived, the charm proved successful. When an infant lacking a charm perished, the absence of protection received blame. Unsuccessful protections, when an infant with a charm still died, were rationalized by improper ceremony, a flawed charm, or exceptionally powerful demonic assault requiring even more robust countermeasures. This established a perpetuating mechanism. Catastrophe strengthened conviction in demons. Conviction in demons made protections necessary. Protections occasionally corresponded with survival. Survival demonstrated the demons existed and the safeguards functioned. The pattern persisted across generations. The archaeological evidence validates how earnestly these convictions were held. Thousands and thousands of charms and vessels remain. Prosperous households commissioned elaborate silver charms. Impoverished households managed with parchment inscribed with identical formulas. Everyone, irrespective of position, engaged in the supernatural warfare against Lilith and her offspring. Contemporary perspectives might view these as charming folk customs, yet they represented genuine terror and genuine optimism. Parents interring incantation vessels beneath their dwellings believed they were implementing concrete measures to safeguard their offspring. Women wearing charms throughout pregnancy believed they were struggling for their baby's survival. The supernatural defense felt as tangible as medical treatment, and frequently more obtainable and economical. The Crimson Woman, Lilith within Christian demon studies. The early church scholars confronted a challenge. Jewish writings mentioned demons they felt obligated to recognize. Yet these entities lacked clear positioning in Christian scripture. Lilith resided in the periphery of Hebrew tradition, never entirely biblical, never entirely dismissed. The resolution arrived through incorporation and conversion. She penetrated Christian thinking without her identity. Church intellectuals examined Genesis with fresh perspective and perceived her influence throughout. The serpent who tempted Eve grew questionable. Why had this being communicated with such reasoning? Why had it approached the woman initially? Certain theologians suggested that the serpent itself possessed female qualities or was controlled by a female demon. The association appeared logical. A woman who rejected divine structure, who introduced corruption into paradise. This aligned with their understanding of the first wife narrative. By the medieval era, the association had solidified in common understanding. Artistic representations started depicting the Eden serpent with a woman's facial features and upper body. The Sistine Chapel maintains this tradition. Michelangelo's serpent rapped upon the tree with unmistakably feminine characteristics. The symbolic meaning ran profound. Woman as temptress, woman as the expression of rebellion, woman as the entry point to transgression. Yet the church required more than symbolic associations. It required functional demon classification to account for earthly wickedness. The succubus tradition supplied precisely that structure. These nighttime demons who visited sleeping men had been recorded since the period of Roman incubi. Christian intellectuals inherited these reports and required explanation for their genesis. The daughters of Lilith, already recognized in Jewish folklore as seductresses and night demons, integrated flawlessly into this classification system. The theological processes became rather precise. Augustine and subsequent scholars discussed whether demons could genuinely procreate. The agreement emerged that they were unable to generate life, yet they could appropriate and manipulate it. A succubus would visit a man during night, gathering his seed. That identical demon, shifting into an incubus, would subsequently visit a woman and deliver what it had appropriated. The resulting offspring were human yet corrupted, influenced by demonic presence from conception. This structure accounted for much that disturbed medieval society. Why did certain children appear wrong from their earliest days? Why did particular family lines generate witches and heretics? Why did certain women possess unnatural attractiveness that compelled men towards sin? The explanation resided in ancient contamination, a demonic lineage extending back to Eden's initial rebellion. The Book of Revelation supplied another vital connection. John's vision portrayed a great prostitute dressed in scarlet, intoxicated on the blood of holy ones, the mother of every abomination on earth. Medieval interpreters perceived in this whore of Babylon an echo of the first rebellious woman. Certain writings made the association explicit, detailing how the queen of demons would manifest at the final days, assembling her daughters for ultimate war against the believers. Witch prosecution records expose how these concepts influenced interrogation. Accused women faced particular questions regarding their demonic paramours. Had a spirit approached them during night? Had they delivered children who perished in early life? Had they experienced peculiar impulses or longings that appeared foreign to their character? These inquiries presupposed a worldview where Lilith's daughters moved among humanity, enlisting fresh members to their fellowship. The conversion of witches into demons became nearly total in certain theological writings. A witch wasn't merely a human who established a compact with Satan. She was fundamentally assuming the position of Lilith's daughter, repudiating Christian structure, accepting forbidden wisdom, employing her sexuality as weaponry, and endangering the blameless. The archetype crystallized. The attractive witch who enticed men, the crone who cursed offspring, the midwife whose clients endured unexplained deaths. Geographic location influenced these convictions. Just as Jewish writings positioned Lilith in wilderness areas, Christian tradition frequently situated her daughters at civilization's boundaries, mountain summits where few traveled, dense forests, crossroads at midnight. These threshold locations belonged to them, neither completely within the human realm nor totally removed from it. The Virgin Mary surfaced as the explicit counterpoint to this demonic femininity. Where Lilith rejected her spouse, Mary embraced divine purpose. Where Lilith declined to deliver human offspring, Mary carried the Savior. Where Lilith's daughters appropriated children and perverted bloodlines, Mary defended the innocent and interceded for humanity. The devotion to Mary expanded partially in reaction to these terrors, presenting a sanctified feminine to oppose the demonic one. Still, even while the Church denounced these narratives, it maintained them. Monastic repositories duplicated the writings. Theologians disputed the precise details of demonic reproduction. Artists rendered the serpent woman with unsettling attractiveness. The legend endured because it fulfilled a function, accounting for the existence of wickedness in a realm supposedly redeemed by Christ's offering. By the zenith of the medieval period, Lilith herself might not have been identified in every sermon, yet her daughters existed everywhere. They occupied the edges of manuscripts, lingered in cautionary narratives told to young ones, and appeared in the fevered admissions extracted from accused witches. The Church had rendered them tangible through conviction, and that tangibility would not readily disappear. The Queen of Zamargad, the terrain of a demon domain. Demons required a residence. They couldn't merely drift through emptiness without source or endpoint. Human creativity required a location for them, a terrain that rendered their existence concrete. Jewish and Christian tradition supplied that landscape, although its precise position shifted with every retelling. The wilderness held principal claim. Isaiah's mention positioned Lilith among the devastation of Edom, in barren lands where no human resided. This made logical sense to ancient populations. Wildernesses were locations of death and trials, where prophets wandered and demons murmured. The shrieking winds resembled voices, the heat generated visions. Travelers who ventured excessively far occasionally returned, transformed, or failed to return whatsoever. Yet beyond simple wilderness, certain writings portrayed a particular domain. The Testament of Solomon, a Greek writing from the initial centuries of the Common Era, catalogued demons with remarkable precision. It identified their residences and their domains. Here we discover references to Zamargad, a metropolis or territory linked with demonic queens. Although the writing doesn't explicitly position Lilith there, subsequent traditions establish the association. She required a palace, a kingdom befitting her status. Zamargad itself stays enigmatic. Certain scholars connect the designation to the Hebrew term for emerald, implying a verdant land opposing the wilderness imagery. Others perceive it as a modification of Samaria or another historical place name. The writing offers limited specifics, yet medieval interpreters completed the gaps. They envisioned towering barriers of dark stone, spires extending toward a moonless firmament, gardens where toxic blossoms flourished and produced fruit that rendered mortals insane. The Zohar broadened this cosmology substantially. Kabbalistic writings portrayed not one demon domain but several strata, a shadow reflection of the divine emanations. At the deepest stratum, nearest to the physical realm, Lilith governed with Samael. Their territory was designated the other side, the Sitra Akra, a location of fractured fragments and inverted holiness. This was where the daughters assembled, where the Lilin reproduced and orchestrated their invasions into the human realm. Entry to this domain arrived through particular portals. Certain writings portrayed these as actual locations, certain caverns, specific ruins, crossroads where the barrier grew delicate. Others regarded them as spiritual thresholds that opened during particular moments. The new moon, when darkness was absolute, the hour spanning midnight and sunrise, the threshold moments when one day expired and another had not entirely commenced. European folklore contributed its own characteristics to this demon terrain. The wild hunt, a cavalcade of spirits that traversed through the night firmament, became linked with Lilith's host in certain territories. They were reported to soar from their concealed domain, to sweep across human territories, appropriating the careless. Mountain summits functioned as assembly locations. The Brocken in the Harz Mountains, location of the fabled Walpurgis night festivities, was one such location where the border thinned. Water designated another category of boundary. Rivers in Jewish tradition could obstruct demons who were unable to traverse flowing water. This conviction manifests in defensive ceremonies, pouring water in a circle, positioning a vessel of water beneath a birthing surface. Yet, particular bodies of water belong to demons themselves. The Red Sea, the Dead Sea, enigmatic lakes in remote lands where nothing survived, these were reported to be portals or assembly locations. The metropolises of Sodom and Gomorrah, obliterated by divine fire, became another site for demon habitation in post-biblical tradition. The smoldering devastation, the Dead Sea's poisonous coastlines, the salt structures that resembled human forms, all of this implied a domain where Lilith's daughters might traverse freely. Certain legends asserted that Lilith herself had counseled the women of Sodom in their depravity, instructing them in practices that resulted in the metropolis's obliteration. Persian and Mesopotamian influence contributed the notion of the suspended gardens, though reversed. Rather than the attractive terraced gardens of Babylon, demon queens governed over suspended gardens of brambles, where vegetation grew downward into darkness instead of upward toward illumination. These impossible locations resided in the fractures between realms, reachable only through ceremony or happenstance. Medieval Jewish mysticism created detailed maps of these demon domains. Travelers' accounts mixed with theological conjecture to generate comprehensive descriptions. Certain asserted that Lilith governed a mobile court, never remaining in one location long. Others maintained her palace stood in a fixed position, yet couldn't be accessed by normal methods. One might traverse for years and never locate it, or encounter it accidentally in a single night. The daughters each possessed their own territories within this larger domain. Agrat Bat Malat was reported to direct a host that wandered particular routes through the night firmament. Naama held court in sites linked with water and mirrors. Lesser daughters dominated smaller domains, a specific forest, a coastal stretch, a series of caverns. They were feudal nobles in a dark kingdom, answering to their mother yet maintaining their own territories. Physical portrayals varied yet shared common characteristics. Structures made of materials that shouldn't maintain shape, smoke given structure. Moonlight solidified, shadows that possessed weight, trees that developed without sunlight producing fruit that nourished demons yet would poison mortals. Rivers that flowed with liquids that weren't water, sounds that originated from no discernible source, music that could mesmerize those who perceived it. This terrain fulfilled practical functions in folk conviction. If demons resided somewhere particular, they could be contained there. Ceremonies and prayers attempted to maintain them within their limits, to reinforce the barriers between their domain and ours. Conversely, particular actions might tear those barriers down, might open portals that should stay sealed. Magic conducted improperly, names uttered in incorrect locations, invitations offered without comprehension. The landscape of the demon domain mirrored and inverted the holy terrain familiar to believers. Jerusalem, the metropolis of God, possessed its counterpoint in Zamargad, or the metropolises of the plain. The rivers of Eden that delivered life discovered their shadow in rivers that delivered corruption. The sacred mountains where prophets obtained revelation became summits where demons assembled. Every holy location demanded a profane equivalent to sustain cosmic equilibrium. Modern readers might reject this as pure imagination, yet it operated as tangible terrain for those who believed. Maps occasionally designated these sites. Travelers evaded particular routes at particular moments. The demon domain was as concrete as Rome or Babylon, simply more difficult to access and infinitely more hazardous. It resided on earth, yet not entirely of it. Reachable yet prohibited, proximate yet distant, the night crone and mare, the folkloric transformation in Europe. The demons traversed borders more readily than humans. As Jewish communities dispersed throughout Europe, they transported their narratives of Lilith and her daughters. These accounts encountered local traditions already dense with night spirits and malicious entities. What surfaced was neither exclusively Jewish nor completely European, yet a hybrid that established itself in the collective terror. The Germanic populations knew of the mare long prior to hearing of Lilith. This being arrived in darkness and positioned itself upon the chests of sleepers, producing breathless terror and immobility. Victims would awaken unable to shift, sensing a dreadful weight pressing down, occasionally glimpsing a shadowy female form in the periphery of their sight. The mare contributed its designation to the nightmare, a term that persists long after conviction in the demon itself has vanished. The association arrived naturally. The mare's conduct matched precisely what Jewish folklore attributed to Lilith's daughters. Both assaulted during night. Both focused on the vulnerable, sleepers, young ones, expectant women. Both could be repelled with particular talismans and ceremonies. As communities intermingled, the narratives merged. The mare transformed into another manifestation of the Lilin, another expression of the identical ancient danger. Slavic territories possessed their own variations. The Moa in southern territories, the Mara in the north, the Zmora in Polish tradition. Each culture molded the demon slightly differently, yet the essence stayed constant. A female spirit, frequently manifesting as an attractive woman who shifted into something monstrous, who penetrated through keyholes or fissures in barriers, who departed victims depleted and terrified. The British Isles contributed the figure of the hag, especially prominent in Scottish and Irish folklore. This was an elderly woman, withered yet powerful, who traversed through the night on human victims as though they were steeds. She would braid their hair or the manes of horses in the stable, establishing elf locks that delivered misfortune. To discover your hair mysteriously braided in the morning constituted proof the hag had visited. The pattern aligned with Lilith's own conversion in legend, from attractive maiden to ancient crone. Scandinavia created perhaps the most comprehensive classification of these night spirits. The Mara there could be a distinct entity or the separated spirit of a living woman dispatched out during sleep to afflict others. Particular women were believed to be Mara-ridden without their conscious awareness, their spirits slipping free while they slept. This corresponded with medieval Christian concepts of the witch, whose soul might attend demonic gatherings while her body remained in bed. The physical proof left behind became vital to these convictions. Victims reported comparable symptoms across enormous distances and cultures. Waking during the night, unable to shift, a feeling of pressure on the chest, breathing difficulty, visual or auditory hallucinations, profound terror. Modern medicine identifies this as sleep paralysis, a temporary disruption of the normal shift between sleep states. Yet for centuries, it constituted proof of demonic visitation. Geographic variations contributed particular specifics. Italian folklore mentioned the strega, the witch who transformed into an owl or moth to penetrate homes. She too preyed on young ones and sleeping adults. Romanian tradition portrayed the moroi, female vampires, who were fundamentally identical to succubi. Greek villages feared the galudes, spirits of women who expired in childbirth and returned to appropriate living babies. Each culture rendered the identical danger in local hues. The techniques of repelling these beings evolved comparably across territories. Iron offered universal protection. An iron spike above the entrance, scissors beneath the pillow, a horseshoe over the threshold. The metal's characteristics disrupted demonic power. Salt, another substance linked with preservation and purity, fulfilled comparable functions. Lines of salt across windows and entrances established barriers the night demons were unable to traverse. Plants presented defense as well. Garlic, already recognized from Mediterranean and Eastern European traditions as demon repellent, expanded across the continent. Mugwort, rue, vervain, and other bitter or aromatic herbs were bundled and suspended in homes. The particular plants varied by territory, yet the principle stayed. Strong scents and substances linked with life and development could oppose beings of death and darkness. Religious emblems assumed fresh importance in Christian Europe. Where Jewish charms called upon particular angel names to restrain Lilith, Christian variations called on saints and the Virgin Mary. The sign of the cross, blessed water, consecrated medallions. These fulfilled the identical function as older protective magic baptized into Christian custom. The timing of assaults displayed remarkable consistency. The night demons arrived most frequently during the hours spanning midnight and sunrise. They focused on women in their monthly cycles, women during or immediately following childbirth, and unbaptized infants. They were unable to penetrate a home uninvited, yet might be welcomed accidentally through careless utterances or leaving entrances slightly open at the incorrect hour. Folk narratives maintained warnings in narrative form. An attractive woman manifests at twilight, requesting to be admitted. She appears harmless, even pitiable, yet those who permit her discover their young ones sick by morning. A man dreams of a lovely maiden. She approaches him nightly, until he develops pale and weak, aging rapidly. A midwife is summoned to attend a delivery in an unfamiliar house. She perceives through glamour magic that the refined ladies present are actually monsters, and only her swift prayer rescues the mother and infant. These narratives fulfilled social functions extending past demon defense. They enforced community standards regarding hospitality and caution, regarding the hazards of solitary travel and the significance of ritual protection. They assigned names to experiences that otherwise appeared random or meaningless. When an infant expired from SIDS, the night hag offered an explanation. When a young individual wasted away from undiagnosed illness, the succubus received blame. The legal mechanism occasionally recognized these convictions officially. Witch prosecutions across Europe occasionally incorporated charges of night riding or spirit dispatching. Women accused of being witches faced questions regarding their nighttime activities, regarding spirits they directed, regarding whether they had departed their bodies during night. The presumption was that witches weren't merely humans who had established compacts with demons, yet might be demons themselves. Daughters of the ancient lineage who had penetrated human communities. Physical traits became indicators of demonic heritage. A woman who was excessively attractive or excessively ugly, who possessed unusual eyes or peculiar birthmarks, who stayed unmarried past anticipated age, who never delivered children or whose children regularly expired. All of these could designate her as potentially demon-influenced. The characteristics that Jewish folklore attributed to Lilith's daughters transferred readily to European women who failed to conform. Still, the folklore maintained something else as well, techniques of resistance that empowered ordinary individuals. You didn't require a priest or rabbi to safeguard yourself from the night demons. You could collect herbs yourself. You could position iron yourself. You could utter the correct phrases and make the correct signs. This was magic accessible to everyone. A democratization of spiritual combat that resided alongside official religious power structures. The designations transformed across languages and centuries. Particular ceremonies varied by culture and territory, yet the underlying pattern stayed stable for thousands of years. Night demons who were female, who assaulted the vulnerable, who could be defended against through particular practices. The daughters of Lilith wore numerous faces across Europe, yet they stayed recognizably her offspring. The romantic reinvention. Lilith in 19th century art and literature. Something transformed in the 19th century. The demons started to shift under the observation of poets and painters. Lilith, for millennia the embodiment of terror and danger, became something else entirely. Attractive, tragic, nearly sympathetic. Her daughters pursued this reimagining. Their monstrous dimensions softened into hazardous allure. The Romantic movement perceived in Lilith what it valued most: rebellion, passion, and suffering. She had challenged authority and paid an eternal cost. She was attractive and terrible, sensual and distant. She embodied the femme fatale long prior to that term being created. For artists attempting to push against Victorian propriety while operating within its constraints, Lilith presented perfect subject matter. Dante Gabriel Rossetti rendered her twice, each variation capturing a different facet of the legend. In Lady Lilith, she sits nude before a mirror, combing her lengthy hair, an image of pure narcissism and sensuality. Her face displays no remorse or suffering, only serene self-absorption. Rossetti positioned her as the counterpoint of Mary Magdalene, another subject he rendered. Where Mary turned from transgression toward salvation, Lilith stays eternally committed to her own attractiveness and power. The poem Rossetti, composed for the rendering, makes her danger explicit. And still she sits, young while the earth is old, and subtly of herself contemplative, draws men to watch the bright web she can weave, till heart and body and life are in its hold. She is no longer the child thief of folklore, yet a seductress who enslaves through attractiveness itself. Her web captures not infants yet adult men, their hearts instead of their seed. Other pre-Raphaelite painters pursued this interpretation. John Collier's Lilith displays her as the Eden serpent coiled around the tree with a woman's torso and head. Her expression is knowing, nearly amused. She doesn't manifest evil so much as hazardous, like an attractive predator. The moral assessment inherent in earlier portrayals fades into aesthetic appreciation. Literature sees the figure as well. George MacDonald's novel Lilith from 1895 establishes an elaborate fantasy realm, where she manifests as a complex character, not merely evil, yet wounded and ultimately redeemable. She has transformed into a tragic queen, her cruelty originating from ancient hurt instead of inherent character. This was radical reinterpretation, implying that the first demon might be rescued. The daughters of Lilith pursued their mother into this fresh aesthetic. Where folklore had rendered them child stealers and nightmare bringers, Romantic literature converted them into vampires, sirens, and seductive phantoms. They maintained danger, yet gained attractiveness and a kind of nobility. They were no longer merely dangers to be repelled, yet figures of dark fascination. The vampire genre owes enormous debt to this reframing. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla from 1872 presents a female vampire who is attractive, sophisticated, and genuinely capable of affection, albeit an affection that consumes its object. She displays all the characteristics of Lilith's daughters: nighttime habits, preying on sleeping victims, a focus on young women, and an ambiguous sexuality. Yet, she is also lonely, seeking connection even while she destroys. This reflected shifting attitudes toward femininity itself. The Victorian era maintained strict codes regarding women's proper conduct, yet was simultaneously obsessed with transgressive femininity. Lilith and her daughters could embody everything forbidden: sexual agency, independence, power, refusal of motherhood, pursuit of wisdom, rejection of male authority. Artists and writers projected onto these demons their own ambivalent feelings regarding changing gender roles. The symbolist movement pushed this further. Gustave Moreau's paintings portrayed attractive, hazardous women drawn from mythology and demonology. His Salome and comparable works blurred the line between holy and demonic feminine figures. All became aesthetic objects, their moral status less significant than their visual and symbolic power. Poetry adopted Lilith as a recurring figure. Algernon Charles Swinburne wrote of her as a force of nature, amoral instead of immoral. Robert Browning mentioned her in passing as the first Eve, treating this as accepted history instead of obscure folklore. The demon was becoming domesticated, brought into the parlor through art and verse. Even academic writing started treating Lilith differently. Early anthropologists and comparative religion scholars presented her not as an actual demon, yet as a fascinating artifact of belief systems. She became data, a subject of study instead of terror. This intellectual distance allowed for appreciation of the legend's power without commitment to its truth. The daughters stayed somewhat more frightening in this literature than their mother. While Lilith herself could be portrayed as queenly and dignified, her offspring frequently maintained more monstrous elements. Yet even here, the shift towards sympathy was evident. Where earlier accounts presented them as purely malevolent, 19th-century narratives gave them motivations. They had been wronged, or were seeking something, or suffered in their demonic state. Evil became complex. This reinvention had consequences extending past the artistic domain. It prepared the ground for the feminist reclamation that would arrive in the next century. By rendering Lilith sympathetic, by emphasizing her rebellion and independence, these romantic artists and writers had already started to question the moral structure that rendered her a demon. If attractiveness and power and refusal to yield were demonic, what did that communicate about the values of the culture making that assessment? The sensuality couldn't be separated from the reinterpretation. Victorian culture was simultaneously prudish and obsessed with intimacy. It couldn't speak openly regarding desire, yet could displace that desire onto demon figures. Lilith and her daughters became vehicles for expressing the erotic imagination in ways that would have been unacceptable if applied to human women. Paintings displayed them nude, or nearly so. Literature portrayed their physical attractiveness in lavish detail. Their predatory sexuality became a central feature instead of a shameful secret. This was hazardous material, trafficking in concepts that the broader culture officially rejected. Yet it sold paintings and books, drew crowds to exhibitions, inspired imitations. The demons were profitable. By the century's end, Lilith occupied a peculiar dual position. She stayed in folklore as a figure of terror, still invoked in certain Jewish communities as a danger to young ones. Yet she also resided in high art as a symbol of attractiveness and rebellion, stripped of her folkloric context and reframed for aesthetic consumption. These two Liliths resided simultaneously, fulfilling different audiences and functions. The daughters underwent a comparable split. They were still nightmares in children's narratives, still part of folk practices surrounding childbirth and infant care, yet they were also becoming vampires in Gothic literature, seductive ghosts in ghost narratives, attractive monsters in decadent poetry. The demon had transformed into an archetype accessible for creative reinterpretation. This conversion in the 19th century established the template for all subsequent handling of Lilith and her daughters. Once the demons had been reimagined as potentially sympathetic, as attractive instead of merely terrifying, as complex instead of simply evil, they could never return to their original form. The romantic reinvention was irreversible. The daughters in psychoanalysis, Jung and the archetype of anima. The 20th century delivered a fresh way of understanding demons, not as external entities, yet as projections of the human psyche. Sigmund Freud and especially Carl Jung created frameworks that reinterpreted mythology and demonology as maps of internal psychological territory. Lilith and her daughters discovered a fresh home in this landscape. Jung's concept of anima offered the vital theoretical bridge. Every man, Jung maintained, carries within his unconscious a feminine component, the anima. This represents dimensions of the psyche traditionally coded as feminine: emotion, intuition, connection to the unconscious, and the capacity for relationship. Anima manifests in dreams and fantasies as various female figures ranging from maternal to erotic. Yet anima has a shadow dimension. When repressed or rejected, it becomes destructive. Jung called this the terrible mother, or anima, as devourer. Here we discover Lilith and her daughters perfectly positioned. They embody precisely what the terrible mother represents. the feminine that refuses to nurture, that takes instead of giving, that seduces and destroys instead of comforting and creating. The parallels run profound. Lilith's most ancient roles, child stealing, sexual predation, night terrors, match precisely what Jung portrayed as manifestations of the negative anima. When a man fears women, when he experiences female sexuality as threatening instead of inviting, when he cannot integrate his own feminine dimensions, anima manifests in dreams as a demon. She is Lilith under another designation. The daughters represent multiplicity of this danger. A single demon might be dismissed as an aberration, yet a host of them implies something systematic. Jung would state they represent the numerous ways the negative anima can manifest. Different daughters embody different dimensions of the psyche's shadow feminine. Agrat as uncontrolled desire, Nama as deceptive attractiveness, the unnamed Succubi as the terror of intimacy and vulnerability. Freud, though less mystical in his approach, offered supporting analysis through his work on sexuality and repression. The succubus legend, he might maintain, originates from sexual dreams and nighttime emissions that men couldn't acknowledge. Instead of accepting their own sexual character, especially erotic feelings toward inappropriate objects, men projected this onto external demons. The demons became repositories for desires the conscious mind discovered unacceptable. The timing of assaults reinforces this interpretation. Demons arrive during night, during sleep, when conscious control lapses. They produce dreams that were sexual, yet frequently mixed with horror. They departed physical proof, exhaustion, occasionally emission that demanded explanation. The demon offered an external cause for internal experiences, safeguarding the ego from recognizing its own shadow contents. Jungian analysts following Jung himself broadened this structure substantially. Marie-Louise von Franz wrote regarding the devouring mother archetype, citing Lilith as a prime example. James Hillman discussed the terrible goddess present in numerous mythologies, connecting her to the necessity for ego dissolution as part of psychological development. Lilith's demand that Adam accept her equality became in this interpretation the psyche's demand that consciousness integrate its rejected portions. The child-stealing dimension assumes fresh meaning in this structure. Young ones represent innocence, potential, fresh beginnings. A demon who appropriates young ones is psychologically an internal force that assaults fresh development in the personality. When someone starts to develop in healthy directions, becoming more open, more creative, now more integrated, the shadow may react with violence. Lilith, appropriating the newborn, is the psyche's resistance to change, its attachment to old patterns even when they produce suffering. Dreams of being chased or assaulted by attractive women, common across cultures and time periods, became interpreted as anima encounters. The dreamer is being pursued by dimensions of his own psyche that he has rejected or failed to integrate. The assault is an attempt at forced recognition. Anima will not be ignored indefinitely. If she cannot be integrated consciously, she will intrude through dreams and symptoms. Female analysts pointed out that women too could have Lilith dreams, though the dynamic differed. For women, Lilith might represent the shadow self, the angry, sexual, free parts of the personality that society and occasionally the woman herself discovered unacceptable. A woman dreaming of Lilith might be encountering her own repressed power and independence. The demon transforms into the disowned self, demanding recognition. The Jungian structure also accounted for the persistence of demon convictions. Archetypes, Jung maintained, are inherited patterns of thought built into human psychology. They manifest across cultures because they mirror universal human experiences. The mother archetype exists because everyone has or had a mother. Anima exists because everyone, irrespective of culture, must integrate multiple dimensions of self. Lilith persists because the psychological tensions she represents are universal and timeless. Modern depth psychology contributed neuroscience to this interpretation. Sleep paralysis, the experience underlying numerous demonic visitation narratives, results from temporary disruption in the neural mechanisms controlling the sleep-wake transition. During REM sleep, the body becomes paralyzed to prevent acting out dreams. Occasionally, consciousness returns prior to this paralysis ending. The experience is terrifying. Awake yet unable to shift, frequently accompanied by vivid hallucinations because the REM system is still partially active. The hallucinations during sleep paralysis tend toward particular forms. A sense of presence in the chamber, a figure sitting on the chest, occasionally explicitly malevolent entities. Cross-cultural studies display the identical patterns repeating. This implies that the brain, when caught in this state, generates comparable threat images irrespective of cultural background. The particular identity of the threat, Lilith, the mare, the alien in modern abduction reports, arrives from culture. Yet the experience of threat itself appears hardwired. This biological basis doesn't erase the psychological interpretation. Instead, it deepens it. The brain has evolved to prioritize threat detection. During vulnerable states like sleep, this system stays partially active. Any ambiguous stimulus gets interpreted as potentially hazardous. The figure in the corner, the weight on the chest, these are the brain's best estimate regarding what might be threatening the sleeping organism. Culture then molds these raw experiences into particular forms. A medieval Christian experiencing sleep paralysis would identify the threatening presence as a demon or incubus. A modern individual might interpret it as an intruder, or if exposed to such concepts, an alien. The underlying experience stays constant. The narrative clothing transforms. Therapy started incorporating these concepts. Jungian analysis occasionally involved active imagination work, with demon figures manifesting in dreams. Instead of attempting to banish them, the analyst would encourage the patient to engage them in dialogue, to ask what they wanted, to attempt integration instead of rejection. A patient dreaming repeatedly of being assaulted by a female demon might be guided to speak with her in imagination, to understand what dimension of himself she represented. Critics of psychoanalytic interpretation pointed out the risks of reducing all mythology to psychology. Just because a psychological interpretation is possible doesn't mean it exhausts the meaning of a legend. Lilith resided as a figure in actual religious practice, with genuine social consequences for thousands of years prior to anyone thinking to interpret her as anima projection. The psychological interpretation is one layer, not the entirety. Yet the impact of Jung's structure proved enormous. It offered a way to take demons seriously without believing in them literally. It maintained the power of the legends while rendering them acceptable to modern secular sensibility. Lilith could matter even if she wasn't tangible. Her daughters could threaten even if they were dimensions of ourselves instead of external entities. The feminist reclamation, from demon to icon of independence. The 20th century witnessed a dramatic reversal. The demon transformed into a hero, Lilith. For thousands of years, a figure of terror and condemnation, converted into a symbol of female power and independence. Her daughters pursued this path, reimagined as women who refused to yield to patriarchal control instead of monsters who endangered human young ones. The foundation was established during the 1800s, yet the complete restoration truly commenced throughout the 1960s and 1970s, running parallel to second-wave feminism. Researchers and advocates rediscovered Ben Sierra's alphabet, observing its vital detail. Lilith received creation as Adam's equal, formed from identical earth. She wasn't fashioned from his rib, wasn't brought into being as someone to assist him, but rather as an equal companion. Her defiance wasn't directed at God, but instead against a structure that insisted upon her subjugation. This interpretation revolutionized everything. Lilith's unwillingness to position herself beneath Adam during sexual relations transformed from twisted sexuality into an insistence upon equality. Her utterance of God's name shifted from blasphemy into claiming authority that belonged to her by right. Her departure from Eden changed from an act of cowardice into the courage required to select freedom instead of comfortable enslavement. She emerged as the original woman to reject patriarchy and suffer consequences for that rejection. The transformation of Lilith into a demon made complete sense within this understanding. Patriarchal religious structures, so the reasoning went, couldn't permit her narrative to receive positive telling. A woman rejecting male dominance, asserting equality, valuing freedom above security. Such a figure posed threats to the complete social structure. Converting her into a demon functioned to caution women against emulating her example. The warning came through clearly. Refuse submission, and you'll face exile and conversion into something monstrous. Jewish feminists spearheaded much of this restoration effort. Judith Plaskow's significant essay, The Coming of Lilith, reimagined the original woman as someone worthy of emulation. Aviva Kana-Zukov authored pieces about Lilith as the original independent woman. The publication Lilith, established in 1976, explicitly adopted the name to embody Jewish feminist perspectives, questioning traditional understandings. They reclaimed the demon as their foremother. Lilith's daughters gained advantages from this reinterpretation. If Lilith herself had suffered slander from patriarchy, her daughters were women across history who had rejected conformity. Every woman facing witchcraft accusations, every woman remaining unmarried, every woman pursuing knowledge or authority or sexual autonomy, existing outside control, these represented Lilith's authentic daughters, not demonic offspring, but revolutionaries against unjust structures. This understanding reinterpreted the accusations in themselves. When folklore asserted Lilith stole children, was this not men's fear projected outward that women might place themselves above motherhood? When accusations of seducing men arose, was this not merely assigning blame to women for male desire beyond control? The child abduction became rejection of mandatory motherhood. The seduction became claiming ownership of personal sexuality. Academic feminist theology constructed sophisticated iterations of these perspectives. Researchers like Raphael Patai documented Lilith's beginnings and development, demonstrating how the narrative shifted to fulfill various social requirements. Others drew comparisons between Lilith and additional suppressed goddess figures, contending for an ancient heritage of powerful female divinity that patriarchal monotheism had methodically demonized. The political consequences were unmistakable. If patriarchy could take someone like Lilith, created as an equal, demanding fairness, and convert her into a demon, what did this disclose about power's operations? It revealed that the system perpetuated itself not solely through violence, but through storytelling. By controlling which narratives received telling and how interpretation occurred, patriarchy molded reality in itself. Reclaiming Lilith thus became political action, a retrieval of narrative authority. Authors and artists embraced this movement with enthusiasm. Anita Diamant's novel, The Red Tent, presented Lilith as a wise woman wronged throughout history. Novels, poetry, theatrical works, and visual art reimagined the original woman as powerful rather than wicked, selecting freedom rather than suffering exile. Where romantic artwork had rendered her beautiful, feminist artwork rendered her righteous. The Jewish feminist Seder, an alternative to conventional Passover observances, sometimes featured a Lilith's cup positioned alongside the traditional Elijah's cup. This symbolized the female prophet, the woman's perspective excluded from traditional ceremony. Though Lilith wasn't a prophet in herself, she represented all women, erased from religious history, demonized or eliminated rather than celebrated. Not everyone within feminism accepted this reclamation without criticism. Some highlighted the danger of identifying with a figure whose central mythology featured harming children. Even as symbolic representation, they contended this was troubling. Others observed that Lilith's narrative was fundamentally about privileged positioning. She was Adam's equal, after all, while Eve received creation as subordinate. What about the Eves of the world who began from inequality? Did they hold less significance than the Liliths who rejected accepting it? Concerns also existed regarding cultural appropriation. Lilith was a figure from Jewish heritage, yet she was being claimed by non-Jewish feminists who sometimes removed that framework. The demon became a universal representation of female resistance, but through doing so, lost her particular cultural and religious significance. Some Jewish feminists welcomed the wider adoption, while others discovered it disturbing. The reclamation also needed to address Lilith's authentic darkness. She wasn't simply misunderstood throughout the folklore, she was depicted as genuinely harmful. The narratives described her choking infants, provoking miscarriages, demolishing marriages. Could this simply be dismissed as patriarchal defamation? Or did the tradition preserve something more layered, a recognition that female authority, like any authority, could prove destructive as well as generative? Some feminist interpretations discovered value within that darkness. Yes, Lilith was dangerous, but women's rage is warranted. Women compelled into subordinate positions have reason for fury. The demon could embody righteous anger at injustice. Her violence wasn't wickedness, but revolutionary, the destruction required before new creation could commence. The daughters in this revolutionary interpretation were every woman who resisted, the woman refusing marriage and confronting witchcraft accusations, the midwife whose understanding threatened male physicians, the woman whose beauty and independence labeled her as dangerous, the lesbian whose sexuality existed beyond male authorization, the woman pursuing education or profession above motherhood. All of these were Lilith's daughters, continuing forward her refusal to submit. Popular culture absorbed these concepts rapidly. Young women started naming themselves or their daughters Lilith, reclaiming the name from demonic toward empowering. Feminist bookstores and spiritual locations used Lilith imagery. Musical groups, products, and organizations claimed the name, capitalizing on its connections with strength and independence. The Internet era accelerated this distribution. Websites, discussion boards, and social media amplified the feminist interpretation. Online images portrayed Lilith as the original woman who defended herself. Blog entries explained her narrative as the genuine reason she was demonized. The story became simplified, but also more extensively distributed than ever previously. Yet, complexity remained underneath the surface. Academic feminist researchers continued wrestling with Lilith's multivalent significance. She could be both victim and victimizer, both wronged and dangerous, both justified in her anger and accountable for her decisions. The mythology resisted simple appropriation because it was ancient and stratified, molded by thousands of years and multiple cultures. The reclamation of Lilith represents among feminism's most striking reinterpretations of traditional source material. A figure explicitly designated evil and demonic became a hero and someone to emulate. Her daughters, the nightmares of folklore, became a metaphorical sisterhood of resistance. Whether this interpretation captures Lilith's truth or constructs a new mythology of its own remains contested, but its capacity to inspire and challenge is undeniable. The pop culture sisterhood, Lilith's daughters throughout film, television, and gaming. Modern entertainment media discovered what folklore had always understood. Demons create compelling characters. As film, television, and video gaming became dominant storytelling formats throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Lilith and her daughters proliferated across screens and pixels. They evolved to satisfy each medium's requirements while maintaining their fundamental qualities. Television discovered Lilith particularly valuable. The medium's requirement for recurring characters and season-long narratives suited demon mythology perfectly. In Supernatural, Lilith manifests as among the series' major adversaries, a powerful demon laboring to shatter the seals binding Lucifer. She assumes different vessels, manifesting sometimes as a young girl, exposing the separation between innocent appearance and monstrous essence. The show's Lilith commands demon legions, explicitly positioning her as a maternal figure to Hell's forces. True Blood pursued a different direction, linking Lilith to vampire mythology. Here she transforms not into the mother of demons, but the original vampire created by God as punishment or perhaps testing. The show's mythology renders all vampires her children in quite literal fashion, extending the Daughters of Lilith concept toward an entire species. Characters worship her, fear her, and ultimately must face her when she emerges from ancient slumber. The Frasier sitcom presented an unexpected Lilith, not a demon whatsoever, but a character named Lilith Sternin, Frasier's ice-cold intellectual former wife. While presented for comedy, the character embodies several traditional Lilith characteristics: dominance, intelligence, emotional remoteness, and a certain predatory quality in relationships. She unmans Frasier regularly through intellectual and emotional superiority. The name selection was intentional, capitalizing on the demon's associations. Video gaming embraced Lilith with enthusiasm. The Diablo series presents Lilith as the daughter of Mephisto and mother of the Nephilim, a race of beings born from the union of angels and demons. Diablo 4 renders her the primary antagonist, portraying her with a degree of detail and complexity unprecedented in the franchise. She desires to protect her children, even if that requires destroying humanity. The game presents her as simultaneously monstrous and sympathetic. Darkstalkers, a fighting game series, features Morrigan and Lilith as characters, explicitly connected succubi with bat wings and revealing costumes. They embody the sexualized demon woman archetype while being portrayed as protagonists rather than adversaries. The games trade heavily on the succubus mythology, while situating it within a world where demons, humans, and other supernatural beings coexist and struggle. The Borderlands series features multiple characters named Lilith, most prominently the Siren-class character in Borderlands 2. She possesses magical abilities, a rebellious attitude, and functions as a leadership figure. While not explicitly demonic, she carries forward the associations of power, independence, and danger. Film has been more subtle, but no less widespread. The demon woman who seduces and destroys manifests in countless horror films, though she isn't always named Lilith. Jennifer's Body presents a teenage girl possessed by a demon who begins seducing and consuming male classmates, a modern succubus narrative, complete with the sexual threat and body horror. The entity dramatizes sleep paralysis and sexual assault by invisible forces, connecting to the incubus-succubus tradition. Anime and manga feature countless variations. Neon Genesis Evangelion includes Lilith as among the primal beings whose awakening threatens humanity. High School DxD and similar series portray Lilith as the mother of all succubi and a major figure in demon society. These interpretations draw from Western demonology, but filter it through Japanese storytelling conventions and aesthetics. Comic books have their own iterations. Lucifer, by Mike Carey, features a Lilith who is the mother of Mazikeen, a race of demons. She is ancient, powerful, and operates according to her own inscrutable purposes. Marvel Comics has utilized multiple characters named Lilith, including one who claims to be the mother of all demons, and another connected to Dracula's mythology. Young adult literature discovered Lilith through the urban fantasy expansion. Characters descended from Lilith, serving Lilith, or possessed by fragments of Lilith appear in dozens of series. These books often soften the demon's danger while preserving her rebellion and authority. She becomes a dark patron for teenage girls, navigating the same struggles with authority and identity that Lilith faced in Eden. The vampire romance genre owes an indirect but substantial debt to Lilith mythology, the sexy, dangerous, nocturnal predator who forms forbidden relationships with mortals. This is a succubus by another name. Whether it's Twilight, The Vampire Diaries, or countless other series, the basic template derives from the Thames source material that gave us Lilith's daughters. Role-playing games, both tabletop and digital, codified many of these interpretations into game mechanics. Dungeons and Dragons has featured Lilith-inspired demons and devils since its early editions. Succubi appear as official monster types with specific stat blocks and behaviors drawn directly from the folklore. Players can summon them, battle them, or in some games, portray them. World of Darkness and similar games with modern occult settings position Lilith's children front and center. The Vampire the Masquerade setting includes the Bahari, a bloodline that worships Lilith as the Dark Mother. Demon the Fallen features Lilith as a powerful being connected to the fall of the angels. These games encourage players to explore the moral complexity of demon characters. Streaming content has accelerated the multiplication of Lilith-inspired characters. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina features Lilith as a major character, Madam Satan, working to become Queen of Hell. She is ambitious, powerful, and ultimately sympathetic despite her demonic nature. The show explicitly references the alphabet of Ben Sira, presenting Lilith's story as historical within its fictional world. American Gods includes Lilith as among the old gods struggling for relevance in modern America. She appears only briefly, but her presence acknowledges the power of the mythology. The novel and series treat mythology as literally real, with gods and demons sustained by human belief. Lilith endures because people still tell her story. Animation for adults has also embraced the demon woman archetype. Castlevania features succubi and demon queens drawn from the folklore tradition. Helluva Boss and Has-Been Hotel populate hell with a society of demons, many of whom display traits associated with Lilith's daughters. These shows blend horror with dark comedy, rendering demons simultaneously threatening and relatable. The aesthetic of Lilith's daughters has become codified across media: dark hair or unnaturally bright hair, pale skin revealing clothing that emphasizes sexuality, often wings, bat wings, feathered wings or abstract energy wings, claws or long nails, eyes that glow or appear inhuman. The specific details vary, but the overall impression remains consistent. Beautiful, dangerous, otherworldly. This visual language draws from centuries of artistic depiction filtered through modern sensibilities. The pre-Raphaelite paintings, the Romantic poetry, the medieval woodcuts, the ancient amulets, all contribute to how contemporary media visualizes these characters. Each new iteration references earlier ones, building a palimpsest of demonic imagery. The proliferation across media has made Lilith and her daughters more familiar to contemporary audiences than ever before in history. A person who has never read the alphabet of Ben Sira or seen a protective amulet might still know the name Lilith from a dozen different shows, games, or books. The demon has achieved mainstream recognition. Yet this familiarity comes with dilution. The figure becomes malleable, adapted to whatever story needs telling. She can be villain or hero, monster or misunderstood victim, ancient evil or modern rebel. The specific cultural and religious context fades, while the archetypal elements persist. Lilith becomes a template rather than a particular tradition. The daughters especially have become a category more than individuals. Lilith's daughter in pop culture can signify any beautiful, dangerous demon woman character. The term functions as shorthand for a set of traits and narrative possibilities. Writers and game designers can invoke the category without needing to reference the deeper mythology. This represents both loss and transformation. The rich complexity of the original traditions gets simplified for mass consumption, but that simplification also ensures survival. Myths preserved only in academic texts and religious communities eventually fade from living culture. Myths that appear in television shows and video games remain vital, even if changed. The daughters of Lilith have thus achieved a kind of immortality through popular culture. They appear in new forms every year, adapted to new media and new audience expectations. They remain recognizably themselves, nocturnal, beautiful, dangerous, independent, while constantly reinventing the details. The children of the first demon thrive in the 21st century. The Lilith in all of us, a modern metaphor for shadow selves. Beyond history and folklore, beyond psychology and feminism, the mythology of Lilith and her daughters speaks to something more immediate. Each person carries within themselves aspects they cannot fully accept or integrate. These shadow portions of the self, the parts we deny, reject, or find shameful, find expression in demon mythology. Consider what Lilith represents at her core, the parts of ourselves we exile. She began as Adam's equal but was cast out when she insisted on that equality. She became a demon not through inherent evil, but through refusal to conform. Her transformation suggests a universal process. When we cannot accept aspects of ourselves, we project them outward and label them monstrous. Everyone has a personal Lilith, traits or desires that feel incompatible with our self-image. For some, it's anger that seems too intense to acknowledge. For others, sexual desires that contradict how they want to be seen, ambition that feels immodest, selfishness that violates cherished beliefs about being a good person. These aspects don't disappear when rejected. They go underground, emerging in dreams, in sudden outbursts, in patterns we cannot quite control. The daughters multiply this fragmentation. Where Lilith is the original exile, her daughters represent the proliferation of denied aspects over time. Each quality we reject, each impulse we cannot integrate, becomes another demon child. The internal world fills with these orphan parts, each carrying a portion of our vitality and energy, each existing in opposition to conscious intention. Modern therapy recognizes this process under different names. Internal family systems speaks of parts that split off from the core self. Object relations theory discusses how aspects of the psyche become split off and projected onto others. Trauma therapy addresses how unbearable experiences create fragments of self that cannot be integrated. The language differs, but describes the same fundamental phenomenon, the Lilith mythology, dramatized thousands of years ago. The nocturnal nature of Lilith's attacks maps perfectly onto this understanding. Demons came at night because that's when conscious control sleeps. The shadow material emerges in dreams, in the space between sleep and waking, in moments when the ego's vigilance lapses. We encounter our denied selves when we cannot maintain the fiction that we are only the acceptable, integrated portions we claim. The sexual nature of many Lilith legends points to a specific area of shadow. Sexuality remains for many people the part of themselves most difficult to integrate. Desires that contradict religious teachings, attractions that challenge identity, fantasies that seem shameful, these become internal demons. They visit at night in dreams and fantasies because conscious daylight self cannot acknowledge them. The child-stealing aspect touches another profound fear. We worry about the vulnerability of new beginnings, new growth, new possibilities. The internal critic that attacks nascent creativity, the voice that says new relationships will certainly fail, the anxiety that undermines each attempt at change. These are Lilith strangling the newborn. The demon represents the part of ourselves that cannot tolerate growth, because growth requires change, and change threatens existing structures. Yet the mythology also offers hope through its persistence. Lilith was cast out, but never destroyed. She remained real, influential, requiring acknowledgement even in her exile. This suggests that shadow material cannot be eliminated, only related to differently. The demons don't vanish when banished. They wait in the desert at the edges, ready to return. Modern integration of the shadow begins with recognition rather than rejection. Instead of fighting to keep the demons out, this approach suggests inviting them in, learning what they have to say. The anger that seemed too intense might carry information about boundaries violated. The sexual desire that seemed shameful might point toward genuine needs. The selfishness that felt wrong might indicate where too much has been sacrificed. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or abandoning moral standards. Integration isn't about letting the shadow run wild. It's about acknowledging what exists within us without judgment, learning from it, finding ways to honor its truth while maintaining conscious choice. Lilith can be welcomed back to Eden without chaos resulting, but only if her reality is acknowledged rather than denied. The practice looks different for each person. For someone taught that anger is unacceptable, integration might mean learning to feel and express anger appropriately. For someone who learned that sexuality is dirty, it might mean developing a healthy relationship with desire. For someone terrified of their own ambition, it might mean pursuing goals without apologizing. The daughters of Lilith in this framework represent the many ways shadow material manifests. There isn't one demon, but many, because there isn't one rejected aspect, but countless. Each person's internal mythology populates differently. Some struggle most with rage, others with desire, still others with vulnerability or need. The specific demons vary, but the pattern of rejection and exile remains constant. Cultural shadow also follows this pattern. Societies collectively reject certain qualities and project them onto marginalized groups. Women who refuse traditional roles become witches, demons, dangers to social order. Men who don't conform to masculine ideals face similar demonization. Any quality the dominant culture cannot integrate becomes monstrous, attributed to outsiders and enemies. The history of Lilith shows this clearly. As a figure created and maintained largely by patriarchal religious traditions, she embodied what those traditions most feared in women: independence, sexual autonomy, refusal of motherhood, claims to equality. By making these qualities demonic, the culture warned women away from them and men away from accepting them. The demons served social control. But recognition of this process creates opportunity for change. Once we see that demons are projections rather than external realities, we can choose to reclaim what was exiled. This is the work of both individual therapy and social justice. Bringing back into relationship the parts that were cast out, integrating what was rejected, making whole what was fragmented. The protective rituals against Lilith and her daughters can be reinterpreted as boundaries rather than banishment. We need not admit every shadow impulse into immediate action. Discernment remains important, but the goal shifts from keeping demons out to developing conscious relationship with them. The amulets become reminders of self-awareness. The spells become practices of integration. Dreams of being chased by demon women in this light are the psyche's attempt at communication. The shadow wants recognition. The cast-out parts seek return. The demons chase us because we run from them. What if instead we turn to face them, to ask what they need, to understand what their presence means? This is frightening work. The shadow material was rejected for reasons. It felt too much, too wrong, too dangerous. Facing it requires courage and often support. The modern equivalent of the protective angels might be therapists, wise friends, communities that can hold us as we do this work. Yet, the alternative is continued warfare with ourselves. The demons don't cease to exist because we fight them. They grow stronger in exile, more monstrous the longer they remain unacknowledged. Lilith and her daughters multiply in the darkness, fed by our refusal to see them. The only way to diminish their destructive power is to bring them into the light of consciousness. The metaphor extends to humanity as a whole. We carry collective shadows, the disowned aspects of our species, violence we commit but don't acknowledge, cruelty we benefit from but don't claim. Desires and fears so fundamental that only mythology can express them. Lilith and her daughters are part of this collective shadow, embodying qualities human culture has struggled with since its beginning. The enduring power of the mythology lies here in its ability to speak to this universal human experience. Whether we believe in demons literally or not, we all know the experience of being haunted by rejected aspects of ourselves. We all feel the night visits of what we cannot integrate. We all struggle with the children of our own internal Lilith. The archaeological evidence, incantation bowls and amulets, the myths weren't only stories. They shaped how people lived, how they protected themselves, how they understood misfortune. The material evidence of this belief survives in museums and private collections, testifying to the reality of Lilith and her daughters in the minds of countless generations. Incantation bowls provide the most dramatic proof. These ceramic bowls, produced throughout Mesopotamia and Persia from roughly the 3rd to 8th centuries CE, were inscribed with magical texts in Aramaic, Hebrew, Mandaic, or other languages. Thousands have been discovered, many intact, buried beneath thresholds or in corners of homes. The bowls served a specific purpose: binding demons. The text spirals inward from the rim toward the center, creating a visual trap. Demons, it was believed, would be caught in the spiral, unable to escape, contained within the bowl. Many specifically name Lilith and her children as targets. The texts command them to leave the household alone, to cease their predation, to stay bound within the ceramic prison. A typical example, translated from Aramaic: bound and sealed are all the evil Liliths, male and female, that they may not harm or injure or do evil to X, son of Y, and to his wife and to their sons and daughters. The specificity is remarkable. Real names appear. The bowls were commissioned for particular families, protecting particular individuals from particular threats. The physical placement of the bowls mattered enormously. Buried under the threshold, they would catch demons attempting to enter. Positioned beneath the bed, they protected sleepers from nocturnal attack. Multiple bowls might be buried throughout a house, creating a protective grid. Archaeological excavations of ancient homes sometimes find bowls still in place, marking the spots residents considered most vulnerable. The artwork on the bowls adds another layer of meaning. Some depict demons visually, twisted figures with wild hair, sometimes shown bound or defeated. Others show the protective angels or spirits invoked in the text. Still others use abstract symbols and designs that carried magical significance. The bowls were functional objects but also religious art, the craftsmanship varying from crude to elegant. Jewish amulets provide complementary evidence across a wider geographical range. From medieval Europe to modern Yemen, Jewish communities produced protective charms against Lilith. These took many forms: parchment scrolls, metal plaques, carved gemstones, woven bands, all shared the same purpose: keeping Lilith and her daughters away from vulnerable individuals, especially pregnant women and infants. The texts on these amulets often invoke the three angels from the alphabet of Ben Sira, Senoi, San Senoi, and Semangelof. According to legend, these angels were sent to bring Lilith back to Eden. They found her by the Red Sea and threatened to drown 100 of her demon children daily if she didn't return. She refused, but agreed to a compact. Wherever she saw the names of these three angels, she wouldn't harm the child present. Amulets exploited this compact directly. By inscribing the angel names, they invoked Lilith's own promise. Many also included additional protective formulas, verses from Psalms, names of God, geometric designs considered powerful. Some were quite elaborate, filling both sides of a metal plaque with tiny Hebrew script and intricate artwork. Specific amulets targeted specific dangers. For pregnant women, texts focused on preventing miscarriage and ensuring safe delivery. For newborns, the emphasis was on the first days and weeks of life, the most dangerous period. For adults, especially men, the amulets protected against nocturnal visitation and sexual predation. Each danger required slightly different language and invocation. The production and use of these amulets wasn't limited to the superstitious or uneducated. Rabbinic authorities approved their use. Texts on proper creation and consecration of protective amulets appear in serious Kabbalistic works. The practice was mainstream Judaism. for centuries only declining in relatively recent times as modernization and skepticism spread. Christian versions also exist, though less numerous. Medieval Europe produced amulets and prayers against incubi and succubi. These often invoked Mary and various saints rather than the three angels. The Virgin's protection specifically countered the sexual threat, her purity standing against the demon's corruption. Saint Margaret was particularly popular for protecting women in childbirth, explicitly defended against the dangers Lilith represented. Physical architecture sometimes incorporated protective elements. Certain building designs included features meant to confuse or block demons. Deliberate irregularities in construction. A window slightly off-center, a door not quite level might disrupt demonic geometry. Red paint on doors and window frames served protective purposes in many traditions. The color associated with life, and therefore repellent to death demons. The sheer quantity of these protective objects is staggering. Museums hold thousands of incantation bowls and amulets. Private collections contain many more. For every object that survived and reached a collection, dozens or hundreds likely existed and were lost. The archaeological record represents only a fraction of what was produced. This material evidence proves that belief in Lilith and her daughters wasn't abstract theology or poetic metaphor. Real people spent real money commissioning protective objects. Craftsmen specialized in creating them. Texts provided instruction on proper use. Families passed amulets down through generations, treasured as critical protections. The geographical spread of these objects is equally revealing. From Babylon to Yemen, from Egypt to Eastern Europe, from North Africa to Persia, wherever Jewish communities existed, protective magic against Lilith appears. Christian, Islamic, and other traditions in these regions show similar concerns, sometimes adopting Jewish practices directly. Dating the objects provides chronological depth. The incantation bowls span roughly 5 centuries in their main period of production. Amulets appear from late antiquity through to the modern era. The tradition shows continuity across more than 1,500 years. The same names, the same formulas, the same basic understanding of the threat persist across this vast time span. Laboratory analysis of the bowls reveals manufacturing techniques. Many were produced by specialists, suggesting an industry around protective magic. The clay used, the firing methods, the application of text, all show professional craftsmanship. This wasn't folk magic created by each family, but a service provided by practitioners who knew the correct procedures. The texts themselves preserve linguistic evidence. They show how Aramaic, Hebrew, and other languages were used in magical contexts. Scholars studying the evolution of these languages use incantation bowls and amulets as source material. The objects are historical documents, not just artifacts of belief. Wear patterns on surviving amulets tell stories of use. Some show clear signs of being worn constantly, the metal or parchment rubbed smooth. Others appear barely handled, perhaps kept in a specific location rather than carried. Some were deliberately destroyed, broken when they were believed to have captured a demon or when their protective power was thought to be exhausted. Excavations occasionally find caches of protective objects together. A room might contain multiple bowls, perhaps indicating a place where magical work was done. A grave might include amulets buried with the deceased, protecting them in death as they had in life. These contexts help archaeologists understand how the objects fit into daily life and ritual practice. Modern scientific understanding doesn't diminish the historical significance of these objects. They weren't effective because demons don't exist, but they were meaningful because people believed in demons and found comfort in protection. The bowls and amulets represented real responses to real fears about real experiences. Infant mortality, difficult childbirth, sleep disturbances, sexual anxiety. The craftsmanship and care evident in these objects speaks to human creativity under pressure. Faced with dangers they couldn't otherwise control, people created beauty. The bowls are often elegantly inscribed. The amulets show artistic skill. Protection became an occasion for art, for careful work, for objects that please the eye, while serving practical purposes. Collections of these objects exist in major museums worldwide. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Israel Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art all hold examples. Scholars continue to study them, publish translations and analyses, debate fine points of interpretation. The objects remain active subjects of research, not merely curiosities. For contemporary people, seeing these objects creates a direct connection to the past. Standing before an incantation bowl inscribed with Lilith's name, one confronts the reality of belief. This wasn't theoretical demonology, but applied protection. Someone commissioned this bowl. A craftsman inscribed it. A family buried it beneath their home, trusting it to guard them through the darkness. The enduring children. Why the mythology will not die. Lilith and her daughters have survived every attempt to dismiss them. Rational explanation has not killed the mythology. Scientific understanding of infant mortality and sleep paralysis has not made them irrelevant. Feminism has reinterpreted them. Psychology has explained them. Modernity has dismissed them. Yet they persist. The endurance of the mythology demands explanation. Part of the answer lies in what they represent. The daughters of Lilith embody fears that remain despite changing times. Infant mortality has declined dramatically in the developed world, yet parents still fear for their newborns. SIDS happens rarely, but its randomness terrifies. The medical explanations exist, but they cannot prevent the loss or ease the grief. A demon to blame perversely provided more comfort than random chance. At least demons could be fought with ritual and protective magic. Sexual anxiety likewise continues. The succubus mythology spoke to deep ambivalence about desire, its power, its potential to overwhelm rational control, the shame many cultures attach to it. Modern sex-positive attitudes haven't eliminated these tensions. People still struggle with desire that conflicts with identity or values. The experience of sexual dreams, of arousal that seems separate from conscious will, of feeling overwhelmed by attraction, these remain universal. The fear of female power and independence that Lilith originally represented hasn't vanished either. Progress toward gender equality exists, but resistance persists. Women who refuse traditional roles still face condemnation in many contexts. The angry woman, the sexually autonomous woman, the woman who prioritizes herself over others. These figures still make many people uncomfortable. Lilith provides a template for that discomfort, a way of expressing it. The psychological dimension ensures continued relevance. Everyone has shadow aspects, rejected parts of self that require integration. The specific content varies by culture and individual, but the pattern holds. As long as humans have psyches that can become fragmented, the Lilith mythology will speak to that reality. The demons become more sophisticated as our understanding grows, but they remain recognizable. The artistic power of the mythology cannot be overlooked. Lilith is simply a compelling character, the first wife created equal, who demanded recognition and was cast out for it. The beautiful demon who became a monster through standing up for herself. The mother of an entire race of dark children. These are strong narrative elements that inspire creative work. Artists and writers return to the mythology because it offers rich material. The ambiguity helps as well. Lilith isn't simply evil or simply good. She can be interpreted multiple ways, depending on perspective and need. This flexibility allows the mythology to serve different purposes for different people. Feminists reclaim her as a hero. Horror writers use her as a villain. Psychologists see her as an archetype. Religious believers consider her a real danger. The same figure accommodates all these readings. Pop culture has given Lilith a kind of immortality. Each generation encounters her through contemporary media rather than ancient texts. Young people today know Lilith from television shows, video games, and young adult novels before, if ever, they encounter the alphabet of Ben Sira. This ongoing cultural presence ensures she cannot be forgotten, even as specific details of the original myths fade. The intersection with feminism created a positive feedback loop. As Lilith was reclaimed as a symbol of female power, she became more visible and discussed. This increased visibility led to more feminist engagement, more artistic exploration, more scholarly attention. The demon became an industry unto herself, studied in women's studies courses, featured in feminist publications, celebrated in artwork and literature. The religious dimension persists as well. In some Orthodox Jewish communities, the old protections against Lilith continue. Amulets are still commissioned, though less commonly. Prayers for protection during childbirth may invoke the three angels. The tradition maintains itself passed from generation to generation. Despite modernity's skepticism, New Age spirituality has adopted Lilith enthusiastically. She appears in goddess spirituality, in eclectic pagan practices, in modern witchcraft. Stripped of her specifically Jewish context, she becomes a universal divine feminine figure, often merged with other goddess traditions. This adoption ensures her presence in contemporary religious seeking, even if the details are transformed. The academic study of Lilith shows no signs of declining. Scholars continue to produce books, articles, and dissertations examining various aspects of the mythology. Feminist theologians, historians of religion, anthropologists, psychologists, literary critics all find material worth exploring. The demon generates ongoing scholarly conversation, which in turn keeps her in public discourse. The metaphorical richness of Lilith and her daughters allows almost infinite reinterpretation. Each generation can find new meanings in the old story. The mythology functions as a mirror, reflecting back whatever concerns most press upon the present moment. It's sufficiently complex and multifaceted to bear this weight, never exhausting its interpretive possibilities. The fears the mythology addresses are also perennial. Human vulnerability, especially infant vulnerability, remains real. Sexual anxiety persists despite changing mores. Gender relations continue to evolve and create tension. The shadow self requires ongoing work to integrate. These permanent features of human existence ensure the mythology remains relevant. Technology hasn't eliminated these concerns, but sometimes intensifies them. Social media creates new arenas for sexual anxiety and gender conflict. Medical advances increase expectations around infant survival, making deaths feel even more tragic. Modern life produces its own forms of psychological fragmentation, requiring integration. Lilith adapts to each new context. The mythology's darkness is part of its appeal. Sanitized stories lose power. Lilith remains dangerous, transgressive, uncomfortable. She cannot be fully domesticated or made safe. This edge of genuine threat, whether interpreted as real danger or psychological shadow, keeps the mythology vital. Safe stories are forgettable. Lilith is not safe. The community of interest around Lilith sustains itself. People who find the mythology meaningful connect with each other, share interpretations, create new expressions of the story. Online forums, social media groups, conferences, and publications provide spaces where the Lilith tradition lives and grows. The mythology becomes participatory, not just received wisdom, but ongoing creation. The fact that Lilith appears in scripture, however ambiguously, however briefly, gives the mythology an anchor point that prevents it from floating free into pure fantasy. That single verse in Isaiah provides just enough biblical legitimacy to make the demon feel historically grounded. Even while the full mythology developed outside canonical texts, the suffering and injustice in the world also sustain these myths. When bad things happen without clear cause, demons provide explanation. When systems feel oppressive, demon imagery helps articulate that oppression. When personal pain cannot be expressed directly, metaphor and mythology offer outlets. Lilith and her daughters serve these functions as mythology has always done. The endurance of the mythology ultimately testifies to its truth. Not factual truth about external demons, but truth about human experience and human nature. We are creatures who exile parts of ourselves and then suffer from that exile. We are creatures who fear the feminine, who struggle with sexuality, who cannot bear the randomness of infant death. We are creatures who create mythology to hold these tensions, to make them bearable through narrative. Lilith will continue as long as these tensions exist. Her daughters will multiply as long as human psychology produces shadow. The mythology has survived Babylonian civilization, Roman Empire, medieval Christianity, Enlightenment, rationalism, and postmodern skepticism. It will likely survive whatever comes next, adapting as always to speak to the eternal human condition beneath whatever temporary forms culture takes. The enduring children aren't just the demon's spawn of folklore. They are the stories themselves, passed generation to generation, never quite the same, but always recognizable. They are the interpretations multiplying like the Lilin themselves, each giving birth to new understandings. They are the fears and hopes and questions that make us human, given form in ancient names that refuse to be forgotten.